Of course, after the sale, a portion would be given to Emperor Duobao. However, due to Huang Yuer, the handling fee was waived directly. Jian Wushuang returned to his true form. Just then, Huang Yuer also returned. Fellow Taoist Yuer, I need to trouble you once again. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly and handed over a mustard seed. Inside were various precious treasures. The less valuable ones had already been refined by him into immortal crystals. Seeing this, Huang Yuer sighed and said, "Next time, just give me everything all at once." Even so, she was still quite surprised by the treasures Jian Wushuang and his companions possessed. The last mustard seed he had given her, when appraised by Brother Duobao, was valued at 2 trillion immortal crystals. Now, yet another mustard seed was handed over, containing several pinnacle treasures. There were also some extremely rare and valuable curiosities. After agreeing, Huang Yuer left once more. "These are for all of you." Jian Wushuang turned and handed another mustard seed to Immortal Jiuchan, which contained 200 billion immortal crystals. Immortal Jiuchan swallowed hard and, clearly moved, said, "Jian Wushuang, I don't know how to thank you this time, but rest assured, if you ever need my help, I, Immortal Jiuchan, will have no hesitation. Stop being so polite. It'd be strange if Wushuang cared about your strength." Shuiyang still wore his casual, indifferent expression. However, this time Jian Wushuang patted his shoulder and said, "Brother Shuiyang, this time I truly will need your help, but that will have to wait until you've reached the pinnacle or even become a universe master." "Understood." Shuiyang's expression became serious, and he nodded. The second phase of the auction began on time. Huang Yuer also returned to her seat. The treasures in this phase were hotly contested. Jian Wushuang and the others were in no rush to place their bids. They were all waiting for the treasures related to merging with the Tao. The 19th item up for auction, the Tao Merging Spring, a rare treasure from the chaotic void. A single drop can enlighten the heart, 2 drops can trigger an epiphany, and 3 drops can bring one to the understanding of Tao merging. After Emperor Duobao finished speaking, everyone in the audience gasped. This time, 3 portions will be auctioned. Each portion contains 3 drops. The final price offered by the top 3 bidders will determine who gets 1 portion. If the same person holds the top 3 bids, they will take it all. The starting bid is 10 billion immortal crystals. The auction begins now. As soon as Emperor Duobao finished his sentence, every Tao master in the hall placed their bids at the same time. Fortunately, Duobao was an emperor. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to keep up with all the prices. From the initial bid of 10 billion immortal crystals, in just 3 breaths, the price had soared past 100 billion. The top 3 bids were all over 180 billion. The further it went, the more intense the bidding became. After a stick of incense's time, only 7 or 8 people were still bidding. Jian Wushuang nodded slightly, and Immortal Jiuchan started to bid. 200 billion, 201 billion, 202 billion. Immortal Jiuchan called out 3 bids in a row. Many people in the hall glanced over. When they saw he was seated with Huang Yuer, they understood that Immortal Jiuchan had an extraordinary background. Several people were indeed frightened off. However, there were still bidders continuing to raise the price. The bid leaped from 20 billion to 30 billion in a single increment. But this bidder only offered 1 price, clearly indicating they only wanted a single portion. Immortal Jiuchan kept bidding, still offering the price for 3 portions. In the end, the total for the 3 portions surpassed 100 billion. That was how they secured the 3 shares of Spirit Spring. Goodness! That wiped out all the immortal crystals. Shuiyang sighed with emotion. Jian Wushuang furrowed his brow. He hadn't expected money to vanish this quickly. The treasures they auctioned off had only raised half the amount, about 1,500 billion immortal crystals, which Huang Yuer had just delivered. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to afford the next round of treasures. There were still half of the treasures remaining, roughly equivalent to another 1,500 billion. Altogether, they had 3 trillion immortal crystals, not including the deep-sea pearl. That item had been reserved for the 3rd phase. But the Tao-comprehending treasures in that phase were even more extraordinary. They might exceed trillions. Jian Wushuang would have to sell more treasures. But now, even the supreme treasures on Zhouchun and Shuiyang had been sold. There was nothing left to sell. It seems, I'll have to sell my blood. Jian Wushuang rubbed his temples. If it were ancient demon blood, they could have an endless supply. However, ancient demon blood was highly valuable to mortals but not as useful to true immortals, and even less so to Tao lords. So it wasn't worth much. That meant he'd have to sell his own blood. But now that he'd condensed his God Eye clan lineage, the blood he produced was diluted divine blood, meant for self-sacrifice. Selling it would be a waste. I'll sell divine power then. Jian Wushuang closed his eyes slightly. Since he had already sacrificed himself to become a golden puppet, his 50,000-fold divine power could condense into 5 billion divine crystals. 5 billion divine crystals were equivalent to 5 trillion immortal crystals. After condensing it, his golden puppet body would be drained of power, but fortunately, he could go to the third layer of the universe origin to replenish it. Of course, only he could absorb the origin, as old ancestor Shui he could not. However, Jian Wushuang couldn't absorb too much. This universe origin had been given by senior brother Ghost Eye to his clansmen. He couldn't help but feel a bit guilty for taking more than his share. This time, in order to help Zhouchun and Shuiyang, he'd set aside his pride entirely. The remaining Tao-comprehending treasures in the second phase were almost all secured by them. This naturally drew a lot of attention. Of course, they had nearly exhausted their funds as well. They had spent a total of 6 trillion immortal crystals. Ordinary emperors only possessed wealth of that level. Wushuang, that should be enough. With the experience from my past life, I just need some assistance, and it will be sufficient. Shuiyang could tell that Jian Wushuang was genuinely running out of immortal crystals. Zhouchun also hurriedly reassured him. I also have the Tao-comprehending experience left by my former master, so I don't need any more treasures. Seeing that both of them spoke this way, Jian Wushuang then said, There's still a flower of life, a crucial Tao-comprehending treasure. I want to buy it for Zhang and I. How many immortal crystals do we have left? I have 600 billion left. I have 800 billion, so that's 1,400 billion plus a deep-sea pearl. That should be enough. Jian Wushuang calculated in his heart. Soon, the third phase began. The third phase consisted entirely of high-level treasures. The first item was the deep-sea pearl. As soon as it appeared, the Tao lords were stunned. This treasure was somewhat beyond expectations. After all, it was a legendary item. The starting bid was already 1 trillion immortal crystals. I can't believe there's a deep-sea pearl. Why didn't I hear about this earlier? Unfortunately, I didn't prepare enough immortal crystals this time, so I can't bid. Deep-sea pearl. Notify the family patriarch. Many Tao lords began to gather funds. The deep-sea pearl could serve as a family treasure, a priceless heirloom. It had immense value, even greater than the Tao-comprehending treasures. Some Tao lords, realizing their own strength was insufficient for Tao comprehension, gave up bidding on those treasures and immediately aimed for the deep-sea pearl instead. The starting price of 1 trillion rapidly soared to 1.5 trillion. Jian Wushuang glanced at the soaring price and felt a sense of relief in his heart. This was significantly higher than he had anticipated. Soon, the price of the deep-sea pearl reached the 2 trillion mark. Shuiyang excitedly said, This should be more than enough. With the immortal crystals we already have, over 3 trillion, purchasing that life flower will be easy. Indeed. Jian Wushuang nodded in agreement. The deep-sea pearl was now being fiercely contested by 2 major families. Both of these families were emperor families within the ancient court. After receiving instructions from their ancestors, they were told to sell their treasures to raise funds. As long as they secured the deep-sea pearl, the family would buy back the treasures they sold and reward them further. Naturally, they were willing to go to any lengths, even borrowing money to win the bid. Treasures from the third stage of the auction were not something everyone could afford, and many had already left the venue. Both families reached out to friends among the departing crowd to borrow more money. Ultimately, A burly Tao lord won the bid, with the final price coming to 2.4 trillion immortal crystals. Once the deep-sea pearl was handed over, Jian Wushuang also received 2.4 trillion immortal crystals. Adding what he already had, his total amounted to 3.8 trillion. This can be considered a little meeting gift for that girl, Jiang and I, Jian Wushuang mused, fiddling with the storage ring. Now, they awaited the appearance of the life flower. The third stage of the auction had a total of 10 treasures, and the life flower was the final one. The three of them waited idly for the last treasure to be revealed. After an hour had passed, the auction entered its final stage, and the life flower was introduced. The starting price was set at 1 trillion immortal crystals. Once the life flower appeared, many who were about to leave returned to the venue. They didn't know what treasures would follow this one. Only Jian Wushuang and Emperor Duobao were aware. When the life flower was announced, many people lamented their poor timing. They had already spent all their money. However, a few wealthy individuals, who had the foresight to prepare in advance, had conserved a large amount of immortal crystals just for such a treasure. At this point, the price for the life flower quickly soared to 2 trillion. But there were only a few bidders. Just 3. These 3 were all peak Tao lords. Though they weren't as powerful as Yang Dingtian with his 10,000 times divine power, their talent wasn't lacking. They were all at the cusp of achieving the Tao. Moreover, they had only cultivated a single divine eye technique. With the assistance of the life flower, they had a high chance of successfully merging with the Tao and becoming emperors. Their paths were not weak either. If they succeeded, they would immediately become second-rank emperors and, with a little cultivation, could ascend to the third rank. Given their strong backgrounds, they also had the wealth to support this endeavor. As the price continued to climb, Jian Wushuang calmly raised his hand and said, 3.8 trillion. He remained composed. This was all of his immortal crystals, and if anyone bid higher, he would have no choice but to sell some of his divine power. Once that price was declared, the entire venue fell silent. After a long pause, just as Emperor Duobao was about to begin the countdown, someone placed another bid. 4 trillion. The person who spoke seemed to have staked everything, as if this bid was their last breath. Jian Wushuang observed the remaining immortal crystals in his opponent's storage, then calmly raised his hand and said, I bid 4 trillion, 380 billion. Hearing this price, the Taoist's expression turned to one of surprise. The new bid surpassed theirs by only 30 billion immortal crystals. But that additional 30 billion was enough to crush their hopes. They had already borrowed more than they could handle, and borrowing again seemed impossible, especially since the other party could just keep borrowing too. The cost was simply too high. After all, the auxiliary treasure for reaching the Tao could only assist the process. It wasn't something that would directly make someone an emperor. There was a huge risk involved, and if the process failed, they might not only lose their life but be crippled, all while still being in debt. The pressure was overwhelming. In the end, they gave up on the bidding. Jian Wushuang successfully won the Tao flower. The auction, too, came to a conclusion as the voice of Emperor Duobao announced its end. Afterward, Jian Wushuang decided to stay in the residence arranged by Huang Yue since there wasn't much else to do in Tiantan City. He had purchased the necessary treasures and gathered all the information he needed. There was no point in wandering the city aimlessly anymore. Once he entered the temple that Huang Yue had prepared, Jian Wushuang began researching soul-secret techniques. His goal was to further enhance his combat power. With his current strength of 50,000 units of divine power, it wasn't enough, especially since even his subordinates had reached the same level of divine power. During these few days, apart from his own cultivation, Jian Wushuang also assisted the 4 guardians in performing the self-sacrifice ritual, helping them become golden puppets. With this, he now had 5 supreme battle forces by his side. In addition, he transformed the remaining 9 true immortals, including Fairy Ziyu, into silver puppets. However, Jian Wushuang wasn't omnipotent. As he hadn't yet recovered his status as a universe god, he could only manage the creation of 5 golden puppets. The primary issue was the lack of additional silver divine arts. If there had been more, he could have continued enhancing his forces. Furthermore, once his divine power surpassed 100,000 units, he would even be able to help Guardian Yunhai and the others increase their power. After completing these tasks, the appointed day finally arrived. Emperor Yuing had already gathered everyone in the main hall. Aside from Jian Wushuang and his 2 companions, there were 9 Taoists present. These individuals weren't disciples of Emperor Yuing but rather unfamiliar faces with distinct auras. It seemed they were Taoists who ventured through the chaotic void in search of adventure. Why Emperor Yuing hadn't used his own disciples remained a mystery. Once everyone was assembled, Emperor Yuing began to speak. "I've located Yang Dingtian and that sword Immortal. I'll initiate the spatial transmission, and in an instant we'll arrive near them. I'll conceal your auras, and once we're close, wait for my command before taking action." "Yes," everyone responded in unison. Emperor Yuing nodded and began activating the formation. Spatial transmission wasn't true teleportation, as Emperor Yuing couldn't achieve such a feat. He had to rely on the teleportation array, though this particular formation was a mobile one, which made it almost as efficient as teleportation. The only downside was that it was a bit more cumbersome. Buzz. As the formation activated, everyone instantly disappeared from their original location. They arrived at the ancient region of Fuhai. The name Fuhai was derived from the ancient figure known as Saint Fuhai, an ancient demon whose name gave the region its title. This was a well-known fact, though why Saint Fuhai chose this name remained unclear to most. It was said he named himself after the hidden ocean beneath the land. The ocean lay deep underground, invisible from the surface, hence the name Fuhai, meaning buried sea. There were many entrances to Fuhai, but without using those pathways, it was impossible to enter. Of course, teleportation could bypass the terrain since Fuhai only isolated the physical geography, not space itself. Ordinary cultivators who ventured into Fuhai were mostly in the nascent soul or great Tao stages, and while the region appeared mysterious, it held few treasures. Most who entered were there to hunt the demon tribes within Fuhai. It was rumored these demons possessed ancient demon bloodlines, and by absorbing their essence, one could strengthen their body, which attracted many mortal cultivators. Without this allure, even fewer people would risk entering Fuhai, as the subterranean environment held little promise for treasure or a conducive place to cultivate. Yang Dingtian and Jiang and I had chosen this place to hide. With its many passageways, it was difficult to be surrounded, making it an excellent stronghold. At that moment, deep within Fuhai, on a coral-covered island, there was a small, sunlit hill. Sitting atop the hill was a figure, with an ink-green sword stabbed into the ground nearby. A turtle shell and a skinned stone snake were hanging from the sword, strung together like a mortal's trinket. The owner of the sword, dressed in a flowing white robe, had their long hair neatly tied into a crown, exuding an air of heroism. Despite this, the sword's owner was a woman Jiang and I, who hadn't seen Jian Wushuang for many years. Over the millennia, she had relied on her own strength, mastering the ultimate swordsmanship, and had now reached the threshold of becoming a Taoist. In the ancient world, she had gained tremendous renown and earned the title of quasi-emperor, a sword immortal capable of fighting against emperors and even wounding Taoists. Her brilliance overshadowed even Yang Dingtian and most Taoists in the ancient world. The emperors of the ancient court treated her as an equal, though for reasons unknown, Jiang and I harbored deep enmity toward the ancient court. Several attempts at reconciliation had been thwarted by her ruthless swordsmanship. She opened her eyes suddenly. She frowned slightly and sent a message to Yang Dingtian. "An emperor has arrived. Be cautious." "What? An emperor?" Yang Dingtian jumped in surprise, quickly exiting his cave and rushing toward the hilltop. "Jiang, which emperor is it?" Jiang and I remained calm, her voice indifferent. "I don't know and I don't care." Facing Yang Dingtian's inquiry, Jiang Ni's expression became significantly more solemn. At the same time, her mind drifted back to the moment when she unleashed that sword during her deepest despair. In a flash, memories unraveled. From her perspective, Jian Wushuang had arranged for her to go on a training mission with Xianxia and others. Then, During their expedition in the Lake Marsh Mountains, they encountered a battle that delivered the most devastating blow to her life. She helplessly watched as Immortal Zhou Chun and Xianxia fell one after the other, sacrificing themselves to save her. Powerless to intervene, she finally unleashed the sword technique Jian Wushuang had passed on to her. Even after escaping with her life, she felt no joy. She began frantically searching for Jian Wushuang, because he was the only outlet left for her to vent her pain. However, no matter how hard she tried to inquire, she couldn't find any trace of Jian Wushuang. Even the communication token he left her had gone silent. Soon after, an earth-shattering battle erupted within the dual-faced divine mansion. The dual-faced Buddha had perished. Yang Dingtian had slaughtered all the strongmen of the dual-faced divine mansion. Hoping to gather information, she set out to find Yang Dingtian, but before she could even reach the dual-faced divine mountain, a powerful aura isolated her from advancing further. Later, the ancient court launched its offensive against the sea-covering ancient domain. Information became blocked off. She couldn't find anything. In a daze, she followed the flow of people and left the sea-covering ancient domain. This departure lasted 9,000 years. After leaving the sea-covering ancient domain, she threw herself into rigorous training. Because Jian Wushuang had once said to her, "If there comes a day when you no longer have anyone to rely on, that is the day you become your own support." It was these words that drove Jiang and I to train relentlessly. Her mind contained the legacy of swordsmanship left by Jian Wushuang. She didn't need to seek out a teacher or guidance. As for resources, since every major ancient domain was embroiled in war, she joined the battles between the experts of the Holy Land and the ancient court. She accumulated military merit, which she exchanged for vast amounts of treasures, using war to fuel her cultivation. Though she comprehended the ultimate sword of life, her sword intent also carried a hint of death. The path of death wasn't something Jian Wushuang had passed on to her. She had comprehended it herself through the endless slaughter that weighed upon her heart. The ultimate sword of life and death contained three ultimate paths: life, death, and the way of the sword. The fusion of these three swords made her a standout on the battlefield. Through countless battles, she gradually accumulated experience. It took her 3,000 years to complete all 9 steps of the true immortal realm. Once she became a Tao master, she withdrew from the battlefield. She entered seclusion only after perfecting her mastery as a Tao master. Reaching the brink of merging with the Tao, did she emerge. Upon her return, she earned the title of quasi-immortal emperor through her combat prowess. Though merely a quasi-immortal emperor, she could single-handedly fight against 3 emperors. Her strength came entirely from the power of the Tao. She hadn't cultivated any divine secret techniques, nor did she possess any innate treasures or a divine body. Her physical body had a strength multiplier of 5,000, and she still used immortal power rather than divine power. In contrast, her opponents had 10,000-fold divine bodies, powerful peak treasure sets, divine power, and had mastered divine secret techniques. Divine secret techniques weren't forbidden in the ancient court. Below the rank of emperor, one could only cultivate the first stage. Once reaching the rank of emperor, they were free to cultivate it further. Thus, the 3 emperors of the ancient court all possessed peak-level 3rd-stage power. Yet none of them could do anything against Jiang and I. This level of strength was enough to make her stand out among all the Tao masters of the ancient domain world. Even ordinary emperors had to bow their heads in her presence. She feared nothing. Her only fear was that Jian Wushuang had also perished. Thus, when she gained enough power, the first person she sought was Yang Dingtian, asking him for details about that battle. Of course, Yang Dingtian couldn't be expected to tell her the truth so easily. A bit of force was required. This was the advantage of power. It allowed others to speak to you respectfully, or even to pay their respects properly. From Yang Dingtian's mouth, she didn't learn much. However, the disappearance of Guardian Chiefing and others gave her a glimmer of hope. At that time, Yang Dingtian wasn't entirely truthful, but he indirectly told her that the person she was looking for might have been sealed within the dual-faced divine mansion. So, For thousands of years, Zhang and I had remained in the sea-covering ancient domain, all for the sake of breaking through that grand formation. Jian Wushuang was only here to check whether or not he had been trapped inside the great formation. In her eyes, Jian Wushuang had always been incredibly powerful. He was the kind of person who, despite hardly training, could easily surpass her, Shuiyang, and others every time. His strength advanced by leaps and bounds, to an almost absurd degree. Back in the mortal world, Jian Wushuang had once said that his cultivation had regressed. At the time, she thought Jian Wushuang was probably in the nascent soul stage, or maybe even in the divine image stage. It wasn't until after ascending that she started to believe Jian Wushuang might be a true immortal. But when they reached the twin-faced god mansion, Jian Wushuang effortlessly suppressed a Tao master with just a flick of his hand. He wielded the power of an emperor. She had cultivated for 10,000 years and had only just managed to suppress an error herself. If Jian Wushuang was still alive, she believed he would be far stronger than she was now. After reminiscing about the past, she looked up at Yang Dingtian without answering his earlier question. Instead, she rose calmly. "They're here." Yang Dingtian immediately became alert, yet he sensed nothing. When he saw the figures in the distance, the attack had already come crashing down like a tidal wave. Boom! 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 This is bad. It's the stone scatter formation. Yang Dingtian let out a furious roar, and his divine shield exploded into action. A massive golden bell descended, protecting both him and Zhang and I. "Ha! Just because you have a 10,000-fold divine body, do you think you can withstand my stone scatter formation?" A wild laugh echoed out as Emperor Yu slowly descended, holding a crescent-shaped blade. There were several figures surrounding him. Each one was a powerhouse among Tao masters. TSK. Last time the three of you couldn't handle it, and now only two of you have come. Zhang and I pointed her finger casually. She revealed an emperor hidden in the void behind them, forcing the opponent to reveal themselves. Not bad for a quasi-immortal emperor. Your sword aura has grown much stronger. The figure that appeared in the void smiled faintly. His aura was similar to Emperor Yu Ying's, both at the 3rd tier. His strength was overwhelming. Although he couldn't rank in the top 10 within the ancient court, he could still cling to the edge of the rankings. He was only slightly weaker than Emperor Yu Ying. "Brother Kinzhou, stop wasting words with her. Let's make our move." Emperor Yu Ying could barely contain his impatience. Zhang and I had been a thorn in his side for far too long. He couldn't breathe easy until she was dealt with. Hearing this, Kinzhou didn't waste any more words and attacked immediately. "Break!" Swish! Emperor Yu Ying charged forward as well, sending a voice transmission to Jian Wushuang and the others. "You go and trap Yang Dingta. He's full of tricks and incredibly cunning. You must not let him escape. Hold him down until I finish off the quasi-immortal emperor, and then I'll deal with him." Understood. The group dispersed, surrounding the entire island. Jian Wushuang was among them. He kept his eyes on Zhang and I the entire time, but she couldn't sense his presence at all. This little girl is impressive. She's mastered the ultimate sword Tao, and yet she's standing strong against 2 third-tier emperors without faltering. Shuiyang couldn't help but praise her. Immortal Zhou smiled bitterly and said, "I'm starting to think the ultimate Tao has become somewhat cheap. Both you and this little girl have mastered the ultimate Tao, though you tread different paths. While your strength is similar now, walking the ultimate Tao will be purer. In the future, the path for both of you will be much smoother. Talent plays a role in these things. It's not something to envy." Shuiyang raised his head with a smile. Jian Wushuang remained silent. Shuiyang and Immortal Zhou only noticed Zhang Ni's mastery of the ultimate sword Tao. Although they had known this for a long time, seeing it still left them astonished by Zhang Ni's battle prowess. However, Jian Wushuang was the only one who realized that Zhang Ni's abilities were not limited to just the ultimate sword Tao. Initially, Jian Wushuang thought Zhang and I had merely mastered the ultimate life sword, where life and sword had fused to form the ultimate Tao. But to his surprise, Zhang and I had comprehended the complete life Tao, as well as the complete ultimate sword Tao. These were 2 ultimate Taos. And that wasn't the end of it. Jiang and I had also comprehended the Tao of Death, another ultimate Tao. With all three combined, Jiang and I had already reached the edge of merging Taos. Comprehending three ultimate Taos at once had far exceeded Jian Wushuang's expectations. He had traversed the realm god continent for many years. In his time, he had encountered many prodigies. Take Hui Qing, for instance, who had comprehended the Zen Tao, which was particularly unique among the ultimate Taos. There was also Shang, who had also mastered an ultimate Tao. In the span of time, prodigies who could comprehend two ultimate Taos were rare, though some older generation figures had done it. In fact, the elderly Tianzong had mastered two ultimate Taos. He was the most talented individual Jian Wushuang had ever met in the northern spacetime. Of course, excluding himself. After millions of eras traveling the realm god continent, he encountered even more prodigies. Ultimate Taos had become commonplace, no longer anything special. After all, someone like Shui Yang, a scion of a prestigious family, had also mastered an ultimate Tao. Yet, even within his family, this was not considered a major achievement. He still had to rely on his own efforts to secure matching resources. In the realm god continent, the ultimate Tao was seen as merely a stepping stone for prodigies, a prerequisite to becoming a true powerhouse. But a prodigy who could comprehend two ultimate Taos was different. Such individuals were truly rare. In a high-level world, it would already be quite fortunate to have a single practitioner of the ultimate Tao. In an entire universe, if its foundation was solid, there might be thousands of ultimate Tao practitioners. As for emperors, that was harder to predict. Some universes didn't even have a single ultimate emperor. The realm god continent boasted relatively higher qualifications. Certain alternate universes, though they had existed for countless years, naturally possessed many more ultimate Taos. But even then, they only had 1 or 2 times more than ordinary universes. In the same era, a universe would typically have around 1,000 practitioners of the ultimate Tao. However, among these 1,000 ultimate Tao practitioners, the odds of a cultivator comprehending 2 ultimate Taos were almost zero. Among thousands of universes, 1 or 2 individuals might emerge. On the realm god continent, it would be considered impressive if 1,000 practitioners of the ultimate Tao in the same era could comprehend 2 ultimate Taos. Of course, accumulated over countless years, there were likely many powerhouses with dual ultimate Taos above the level of Tao Lords. Even so, once someone comprehended 2 ultimate Taos, they would inevitably be taken as a direct disciple by a universe god. They would be granted the most powerful Tao-merging treasures. Additionally, they would be arranged to enter the universe god's own universe to attempt Tao-merging. And if they failed, they would be resurrected. Reviving a Tao Lord was an easy task for a universe god, but reviving an ultimate Tao Lord was difficult. Resurrecting someone who had mastered 1 ultimate Tao would severely injure a universe master. Resurrecting someone who had mastered 2 ultimate Taos was beyond the capability of a universe master. Even a universe god would need to expend a vast amount of divine power to revive such a person. The amount of divine power consumed could, if converted to resources, be enough to cultivate a 7th tribulation universe master. Such massive resources were dedicated solely to a Tao Lord. This was the value of mastering 2 ultimate Taos. However, the resurrection wasn't infinite 2 attempts at most. If both failed, then there would be no more hope. There were rumors that a 7-star universe god once helped a younger family member, a Tao Lord, in merging their Taos, reviving them 19 times. In the end, the Tao Lord felt so embarrassed that they shattered their own consciousness and destroyed themselves. The Tao Lords who had mastered 2 ultimate Taos were already so impressive. As for those who mastered 3 ultimate Taos, once they appeared, universe gods on the realm god continent would compete to take them as disciples. This was because, on the entire realm god continent, among the Tao Lords of the same generation, at most 2 or 3 could comprehend the 3 ultimate Taos. Jian Wushuang had encountered one before. It was in a secret realm of time and space in the southeastern region of the realm god continent. His talent was the strongest Jian Wushuang had ever seen. Even when compared to his past self, Jian Wushuang had to admit admiration. This was because, when this Tao Lord was on the verge of merging with the Tao, His divine body had already reached 10,000 times the strength of an ordinary body. His battle power alone could rival that of a tribulation-level expert. He carried numerous opportunities with him, including several chances tied to universe gods. He was also a direct descendant of a universe god family. After mastering 3 ultimate Daos, he was directly recommended by his family's universe god to an incredibly powerful 8-star universe god, becoming the personal disciple of this universe god. Back then, when Jian Wushuang passed through the territory of this universe god, he took the initiative to forge a relationship because the other was an 8-star universe god. That was how he met this peerless genius. Jian Wushuang couldn't help but feel admiration. Although his own path of extremity was extraordinarily unique, it only grew stronger with time, with its greatest benefits manifesting in the later stages. The ultimate Tao, however, was different. It was already part of the ultimate series, the strongest Tao. Thus, battle power naturally grew at a rapid pace. Now, seeing Jiang and I master 3 ultimate Daos, Jian Wushuang couldn't help but feel happy for her. Her talent wasn't weaker than Zhang Shang's or the goddess of Gu Yu's time and space. She was even stronger than Hui Qing. Although Hui Qing was already a universe god, the road ahead would likely be difficult for him. At first, Hui Qing could keep pace with him, but as time went on, the effort required would grow. Becoming a 7-star universe god was already his peak. Reaching the final chapter of the universe god realm would be his limit. Becoming a god of time and space. That was a bottleneck far more transformative than merging with the Tao. For a cultivator on the realm god continent, breaking through this bottleneck was almost impossibly difficult. Except for those born as universe masters or even universe gods, for those who started weak and cultivated their way up, becoming a god of time and space was as hard as a mortal ascending to heaven. Hui Qing's chances were slim, but his daughter Jiang and I had great potential. The 3 ultimate Daos complemented one another. As long as she succeeded in merging with the Tao, the foundation of her divine body nurtured by an emperor was something that could be enhanced with treasures. Afterward, when becoming a universe master, the primary challenge would be the divine tribulation. Tribulations within the universe were not too difficult for cultivators of the ultimate Tao. Moreover, Jiang and I was a master of 3 ultimate Daos. Her greatest challenge would undoubtedly be the divine tribulation. In this regard, she was very much like Jian Wushuang. Both were destined to face the divine tribulation. Jiang and I, let me personally test your current strength. Jian Wushuang prepared to strike. At that moment, the surrounding sky suddenly fluctuated and began to change. A supreme treasure has descended. Everyone was stunned and quickly retreated. But the flickering light enveloped an arca spanning billions of miles, and it would take time to escape. What's happening? Emperor Yu Ying exclaimed in surprise. Is it a chaos supreme treasure? Before they could react, a massive light illuminated the heavens and earth. A massive light gate appeared in the void. Rumbling sounds echoed from within the gate. The presence of the gate left everyone in awe. Seeing the gate, Jian Ni's lips curled into a slight smile. He's here. Yang Dingtian, still unaware of who was arriving, exclaimed, Is this someone you arranged? He hadn't expected that Jian and I, who had been hiding here all this time, had managed to contact external help, and not just any help, it was an emperor. It was well known that the emperors of the sacred land were stationed in various ancient domain worlds at this time. It was impossible for them to come here. In the entire ancient domain world, apart from the emperors of the sacred land, only the emperors from the ancient court remained. Yang Dingtian instantly understood Jian and I had drawn an emperor from the ancient court to their side. Tian Can and Emperor Yu Ying quickly caught on as well. The emperor within the ancient gate was, in all likelihood, an emperor from the ancient court. Of course, there was a small chance it could be an emperor from another universe, but that was highly unlikely. The ancient domain world was so poor that no emperor would bother coming here. Even the Tao lords of the ancient domain world left to explore the wider universe. No one cared about the affairs within the ancient domain world. Only the ancient court and the sacred land vied for the Tao heritage here. Quit putting on a show. Emperor Yu Ying took the initiative, his moon blade spinning wildly in his hand as he charged toward the glowing ancient gate. "I'll see who you really are." Within the ancient court there were 10 emperors in total. Among them, only a few were at the pinnacle of third-tier combat power. None were known to possess an innate treasure of the highest order. But it couldn't be ruled out that someone might have obtained such treasure and kept it secret. If it was a third-tier emperor with an innate treasure, their power would increase significantly, but only to a certain limit. It wouldn't allow them to surpass their tier. If it were indeed a third-tier emperor, they could likely elevate themselves to the peak of the third tier. Thus, Emperor Yuing was unafraid. He rushed forward, wielding his moon blade, and slashed at the gate. Boundless divine power swept across the surroundings. Boom! 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 The clash between the moon blade and the ancient gate produced an earth-shattering sound. The impact caused Emperor Yu Ying's divine body to tremble, yet the ancient gate remained completely unscathed. Not only did it not break, but it didn't even budge. Emperor Yu Ying muttered to himself, "As expected of an innate treasure, it's as steady as a mountain. No matter how much I attack, I can't shake it." However, the power within the ancient gate continued to suppress both him and Tian Can. Forget about it. Focus on that sword Immortal. After all, the one inside the gate wasn't coming out, and at most, they were using their treasure to suppress their strength. It wasn't a huge threat. If the person inside did show themselves, all the better. Even if they couldn't capture the quasi-immortal emperor, they could at least expose the identity of a traitor. No matter how they looked at it, they wouldn't lose out. But what none of them had expected was that the radiant gate suddenly shook for a moment, and a silver beast emerged from within. In just a moment, the beast trembled again and split into two. The aura emanating from it resembled the puppets of those who sacrificed themselves for divine blood. In no time, the number of beasts doubled again. From 1, they became 100. 100 divine power puppets, each possessing more than 10,000 times the strength of an ordinary universe master. This left everyone dumbfounded. My heavens! What kind of place does this ancient gate connect to? All of them are at the Tao Master's peak. Comparable to the strength of an emperor? Even Zhang and I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow and say, "This guy really has some tricks up his sleeve, summoning so many silver beasts." Yang Dingtian, on the other hand, was completely stunned. Each puppet's strength was nearly the same as his own, making him feel utterly redundant. Roar! The beasts howled and charged toward Kanzhou and Emperor Yuing. The Tao Masters that Emperor Yuing had brought with him scattered in every direction. The 100 divine power puppets, none of them could stand against such overwhelming strength. Now, the puppets had trapped both Kanzhou and Emperor Yuing. With that, the quasi-immortal emperor had his hands freed. If they made a move against them at this point, there would be no chance of survival. After all, this was someone ruthless enough to contend with a third-tier emperor. All the other Tao Masters had fled, except for Jian Wushuang and his 2 companions, who remained standing in place. "Brother Wushuang, let me go first and give it a try." Shui Yang rolled his wrists, brimming with excitement. "I've been bullying Guardian Yunhai inside the 9-prison pagoda every day without any challenge. Now's the perfect time to test Zhang and I. See how strong this little girl is." "All right," Jian Wushuang agreed, not in any rush. He knew well that Shui Yang's strength was no match for Zhang and I. On the surface, Zhang Ni's strength was already at the peak of the 3rd tier, and she likely had hidden techniques. Though Shui Yang was also a master of the ultimate Tao, with a formidable divine body and powerful divine strength, further enhanced by his inheritance from his past life and self-created universe-level secret techniques, he only wielded a single ultimate Tao. Though both he and Zhang and I practiced the ultimate sword Tao, the difference lay in the gap between life and death. "Be careful. Zhang and I is really strong. Don't let her kill you." Jian Wushuang couldn't help but remind him. Although his strength had increased greatly, it still wasn't enough to save someone from Zhang and I in the blink of an eye. Shui Yang's eyebrow twitched, feeling a bit defiant. "You underestimate me." With that, he drew his sword and dashed forward. His divine power surged, amplifying from 10,000 times to 30,000 times in an instant. His secret technique, the Divine Eye, had already reached perfection in its first stage. Combined with his self-created universe-level secret arts, his divine power tripled in potency. It was immensely powerful. With 30,000 times the divine power and the ultimate sword Dao, few in the third-tier emperor realm could rival him. Zhang and I, noticing the sudden burst of strength from this mysterious expert, rose to meet him head-on. But as soon as they clashed, she couldn't help but be surprised. This person's strength is on par with mine. He's a Dao master too. That was what shocked Zhang and I the most. Among her peers, it was rare to find anyone who could take even a single strike from her, let alone someone who could match her strength. Suddenly facing a Dao master whose battle power was nearly equal to her own was truly shocking. Up in the sky, where Can Jiao and Emperor Yuing were still battling the silver beasts, they too noticed the eruption of power from Shuiyang and couldn't help but cheer. Though they didn't understand how Shuiyang had grown so strong, it was certainly better than letting Zhang and I escape. Boom! The two exchanged blows, each sustaining significant injuries. Shuiyang was astonished. He hadn't realized Zhang and I had mastered 3 types of ultimate Dao. If he had known, he wouldn't have been so eager for a fight. I clearly gave it my all, yet only managed to lightly wound her. This is absurd. He thought back to the days when Zhang and I, still in the grand perfection stage, couldn't withstand even a single move from him. But now they were evenly matched. The key difference was that he was struggling, while Zhang and I, though not relaxed, certainly wasn't feeling the same level of pressure. Watching the fight from the sidelines, Immortal Zhou Chan couldn't resist a mocking comment. "What's wrong with you? Getting pressed this hard by a little girl? At this rate, you should forget about merging with the Dao and just retire to the mortal world to get married and live as a commoner." Already slightly disadvantaged, Shuiyang was irritated by Zhou Chen's taunts and shot back. "You old fossil, why don't you come down and try? Let's see how many of my strikes you can withstand." Seeing the two brawling, Zhou Chen's hands had already started itching for a fight. Without hesitation, his figure descended onto the mountain peak. "Let's try then." With those words, he unleashed a palm strike, utilizing his Emperor-tier secret technique. The force was terrifying. Jian Wushuang stood afar in the sky, watching everything unfold, without the slightest trace of surprise. After all, Jian Wushuang knew very well that Zhang and I was hiding her true strength. Her power was far beyond that of a mere Tier 3 emperor. She had mastered 3 ultimate paths, and once they were cultivated to perfection, reaching the verge of unification, she could rival those in the tribulation realm, even without a divine body or divine power. The sheer force of her origin source alone would be enough to compare. Unless Zhang and I hadn't fully comprehended life and death, and had only perfected her sword Dao. Even so, with the combination of life and death, she could still wield Tier 4 power. As Jian Wushuang watched Zhang and I, fighting 2 opponents at once, she began to change. Her sword intent now carried the meaning of death. The aura of death surged, instantly suppressing both Immortal Zhou Chan and Shuiyang. Zhang Ni's strength surged to the 4th tier, shocking everyone who witnessed the scene, including the emperor hidden within the ancient gate. She was still hiding her strength. Tier 4 emperor power, and she still came to me for help. Emperor Yu Ying's voice trembled. Even Yu Ying and Tian Can felt their hearts quake. They had been fighting off the strange beasts without much pressure. At first, Shuiyang's burst of power had given them hope, and then Immortal Zhou Chen's surge made them think they would have a chance to pick up the spoils. But to their shock, this genius, near-immortal emperor had been concealing her strength. When she erupted with Tier 4 emperor power, she swept through both Immortal Zhou Chen and Shuiyang effortlessly. Once Zhang and I was free, they knew she would turn her attention to them. Coupled with the silver beasts, they would surely perish here. Realizing this, Emperor Yu Ying quickly pulled out a token. "Lord Long, save me." Without any hesitation, he sent a message through the token. In the next moment, the eyes of an ancient emperor guarding the twin-faced god palace snapped open. The palace was situated on a mountain that had no roots, known in the past as the twin-faced god mountain. At the peak of the mountain sat an elder with fiery red hair and 2 dragon horns sprouting from his head. His eyes burned with endless battle intent. Every movement he made was enough to make the heavens and earth bow before him. This place was guarded by a Tier 4 emperor at his peak. The ancient court had dispatched an unparalleled force to guard this realm, and that force was Lord Long. Aside from the 3 immortal kings of the ancient court, Lord Long was the strongest. The ancient court's first-generation immortal king, Yuanzhang Immortal Sovereign, was the first emperor of the human race and the first Tier 4 emperor. He had ended the ancient demon era and ushered in the era of the Ascendants, becoming a giant among immortal kings. Lord Long had also risen during this time. In fact, his rise predated that of Yuanzhang Immortal Sovereign by quite some time. Back then, there had been no heavenly court, only a unified human race. Lord Long hailed from the dragon people, an ancestor of his kind. He had joined the heavenly court in its early days when Yuanzhang Immortal Sovereign was only a 9-step true immortal, while Lord Long was already a Taoist lord, making him the earliest and strongest fighter in the heavenly court. Though Yuanzhang Immortal Sovereign later rose to prominence, becoming an emperor, Lord Long's strength remained unmatched. However, Yuanzhang Immortal Sovereign's brilliance overshadowed Lord Long. The next 2 immortal kings of the heavenly court were both disciples of Lord Long. Whether it was the true immortal of 3 talents or the current ruler of the ancient court, both owed him the title of master. For the ancient court to send such a figure to guard this place was no disgrace to Lord Long's name. Ling Xiao, I'm heading out. Watch over the formation well. Lord Long's voice was filled with authority. At the core of the formation, a childlike figure nodded respectfully. Rest assured, Lord Long. I will take care of everything. Lord Long nodded calmly and took a single step, instantly leaving the twin-faced god palace. Yet, the moment Lord Long left, a sly smile crept onto the face of the childlike figure, Ling Xiao. On the other side, within the sea of overturning, Jiang and I killed 2 true immortals with a single sword. She beat Shuiyang and immortal Zhou Chun so badly that they couldn't lift their heads. Jian Wushuang shook his head with a bitter smile and prepared to strike again. But once again someone interrupted. A terrifying aura surged from the horizon. A thick red mist descended in an instant, rushing directly toward the ancient gate. The mist immediately enveloped the ancient gate, and the silver puppets were instantly shattered. Emperor Yu Ying and Tian Ken were pulled up from the fray. From the red mist emerged a towering figure, an imposing old man. This was none other than Lord Long of the ancient court. A figure so revered that all the cultivators in the ancient domain would call him Old Ancestor, because when he was born, he was the same age as the ancient demon. Greetings, Lord Long. Emperor Yu Ying and Tian Ken bowed respectfully. Despite Emperor Yu Ying's factional influence within the ancient court, which had earned him the title of one of the 10 great emperors, his power was nothing compared to Lord Long. Lord Long glanced at the 2 of them and said calmly, "This time, it's not your fault. A remarkable individual has emerged from the ancient domain, and there's no way you could have stopped him." After saying this, his figure descended. The emperor within the ancient gate wanted to stop him, but he didn't have the guts. Even if he showed up, the power of the ancient gate was no match for Lord Long. Not to mention, Emperor Yu Ying and Tian Ken, 2 Tier 3 emperors, were beside him and would easily stop any interference. Seeing the sudden appearance of the red-haired elder, both immortal Zhou Chun and Shuiyang immediately understood that this was a powerful figure from the ancient court. "Hey, old man, this has nothing to do with you. You better scram," Shuiyang shouted, unafraid. Lord Long ignored him and, with a casual strike, sent Shuiyang flying. His gaze then fell on Jiang and I. "Fellow Taoist, I can see that you hold no deep hatred toward the ancient court. So why are you obstructing its grand plan?" Jiang and I, holding her divine sword, floated in mid-air, her eyes cold and distant. "This has nothing to do with the ancient court. I just want to break the imperial annihilation formation of the 2-faced god's mansion." Lord Long's brow twitched, and he asked in confusion, "May I ask for a reason?" "I'm looking for someone. Is it that simple?" "It's very important to me," Jiang and I replied firmly. Lord Long laughed. The normally stern and domineering elder smiled and waved his hand, saying, "This is simple for me. I can help you." Lord Long, this. Emperor Yuing was startled. Both of them wanted to stop him, but a single look from Lord Long froze them in place. "But you must agree to one condition," Jiang and I asked calmly. "What condition?" "Join the ancient court and help the ancient domain complete the final chapter of the Tao Orthodoxy." Tao Orthodoxy. This was critical. If the two current Tao orthodoxies couldn't determine which was right, it would affect the foundation of the ancient domain. The sooner the Tao orthodoxy was unified, the faster the number of strong cultivators would increase. The current Holy Land Tao orthodoxy was clearly flawed. It had to be changed. Lord Long didn't care about right or wrong. He only wanted the ancient domain to become stronger. After all, there was no life-changing opportunity in the ancient domain worth fighting to the death for. As for those experts from other realms, upon seeing the cultivation methods in the ancient domain, they could only smile bitterly and shake their heads. If the sacred land occupied the entire ancient domain, there would only be a few powerful figures that could emerge. It would be incredibly difficult for anyone below the level of emperor to make a name for themselves. The ancient court needed to change this situation. What Lord Long spoke of as the great undertaking referred precisely to this. Jiang and I, having seen much in her life, listened carefully to Lord Long's explanation. It reminded her of Wei Zhouxian, whom she had met in the human realm. He was very similar to Lord Long. At that time, Jiang and I could only look up to figures like Wei Zhouxian. Now that she had gained strength, she encountered a Wei Zhouxian of the ancient domain. Without hesitation, she agreed. Upon hearing this, Lord Long smiled and said, "Then let's proceed. I will now open the formation of the bifaced deity's palace, and let you enter alone." Allowing Jiang and I into the formation was nothing, and even if he were to hand over the ancient court to her, Lord Long would be willing. Because in this world, power belonged to the strong. Jiang and I, as a Tao Lord, was not weaker than he was. Once she fully mastered the Tao, she would undoubtedly surpass the sacred Lord in strength. By then, the entire ancient domain would belong to Jiang and I. The ancient court was merely keeping it temporarily. An agreement was reached between them. They ignored the others. In fact, there weren't many others around. Yang Dingtian appeared like a clown, while the emperor within the ancient gate remained silent. Xianxia and Immortal Zhouchen were communicating with Jian Wushuang through secret transmissions. Jian Wushuang stood in the void, pointing a finger, and the seawater within the entire covering sea began to surge. He was about to make his move. As for the great undertaking of the ancient domain, he didn't care. But Jiang and I was different. He wanted to personally test Jiang Ni's strength. Noticing something was amiss, Lord Long immediately turned to look at Jian Wushuang. This was a person even he couldn't fully comprehend. Courting death. Lord Long instantly made his move. Jian Wushuang grinned. Facing the massive shadow of Lord Long's fist, his body shifted, transforming into a golden puppet. 50,000 times divine power surged forth. With just a single finger, he suppressed Lord Long. Emperor Yuing was dumbfounded. Just as he was about to speak, Jian Wushuang suppressed him as well. It was the emperor within the ancient gate. Even the crippled Emperor Tian Can and the emperor within the ancient gate were all suppressed. A golden divine body. Among the crowd present, aside from Immortal Zhouchen and Xianxia, who knew Jian Wushuang's true nature, there was one more who recognized the identity of this golden puppet. It was the emperor within the ancient gate. A golden puppet. He actually sacrificed his body to become a golden puppet. Could there be a Godai clan expert in the ancient domain? The emperor within the ancient gate exclaimed in shock. But it was too late. He had been completely suppressed and couldn't move. Jian Wushuang, having transformed into the golden puppet, wielded 50,000 times divine power. However, when he landed before Jiang and I, a dark red battle armor appeared on his body. It was formed from a leaf of the world tree. Although the leaf had been plucked from the world tree, it contained an individual life form. It belonged to the plant-type life forms. It was akin to the 10,000 willows divine wood. However, the current world tree leaf was still too weak, with only 10,000 times divine power. It barely compared to an innate treasure, but its combat power was definitely at the level of a Tier 4 emperor. This was because its life level was too high. The life level of the world tree was on par with that of the realm beasts. The life level contained in a single leaf was naturally far beyond anything in the starry sky. "Who are you?" Xianxia was dumbfounded. She didn't even know when she had offended such a powerful figure. With a single hand, he had suppressed Lord Long. At least a Tier 4 peak or even a Tier 5 emperor. Could he be the Sacred Lord? Only the Sacred Lord might possess such power. "Don't worry about who I am. Defeat me first." Jian Wushuang even altered his voice. However, this explanation seemed somewhat far-fetched. He spoke again. "Don't you want to save your mother? Defeat me, and you'll find her." Indeed, words needed to strike where it hurt most. Upon hearing this, Xianxia was initially stunned. Then her origin source surged violently. Even her life imprint trembled. Her 3 origin sources were completely exposed. For a moment, her power seemed on the verge of breaking through the Tier 5 emperor level. Jian Wushuang wasn't surprised. It still wasn't enough. Far from it. Boom! Xianxia, without uttering a word, raised her hand, slashing through the void with a single strike. Swoosh! Jian Wushuang didn't dodge. Instead, he crushed the sword's energy with a mere grip, sneering, "Too weak. With just this level of strength, you think you can save your mother?" Utterly delusional. After speaking, he kicked out, sending Xianxia flying backwards, crashing into the dark waters below. Moments later, she emerged once again from the depths. But Jian Wushuang didn't give her any time to recover. He attacked again, unleashing divine power at 50,000 times the normal strength. This was peak-level might. He was utterly overpowering Xianxia. Yet her origin source grew stronger and stronger. She broke through the Tier 5 Emperor level, now reaching Tier 6. Still not enough. She needed to be even stronger. With trembling hands, Xianxia gripped her now shattered divine sword, drawing strength from the thought of her mother. Buzz! She raised the divine sword, positioning it in front of her. "Life and death, forging reincarnation. With my sword's path, witness my true heart. Reincarnation sword." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang felt a surge of memories, an intense battle intent rising from within. This was his ultimate skill. The sword of life, the sword of death, the sword of reincarnation. With a mere lowering of his brow, he became an invincible diamond. "Kill!" Xianxia shouted angrily. Now, Xianxia had perfectly replicated it, and he was the one who had to face it. Jian Wushuang found the sensation rather peculiar. Pressing his palms together, he too responded to the moment. Unbeatable golden body. This was a technique Hu Qing once used at the emperor level. With a mere lowering of his brow, he became an invincible diamond. "Kill!" Xianxia shouted angrily. "Suppress!" Jian Wushuang roared in response. Each unleashed their respective techniques, the ones that originally belonged to them. A sword clashed against a Buddha's form. The two collided. Heaven and earth lost their color. The entire 9 heavens of overturned seas shattered under the blows. From then on, it was no longer the overturned seas. It had truly become an endless ocean. The ancient domain of the overturned seas was completely obliterated. Boom! In the collapsing world, Jian Wushuang's figure vanished. Along with him, both Immortal Zhouchun and Xiangyang left as well. The ancient gate, now freed from suppression, fled immediately. Long Gong carried the unconscious Xianxia and the others as they left the overturned seas. 3 days later, news of the destruction of the ancient overturned seas domain spread across the ancient domain worlds. At the same time, the emperor suppressed within the Twin Gods' palace was also released. Ling Xiaobo betrayed them. The emperor who had been imprisoned returned to the sacred land, bringing Ling Xiaobo along. But Ling Xiaobo felt some regret. He could have used the world's collapse to let that emperor escape, then return to the ancient court himself. He could have continued being an undercover agent. Now, he had exposed himself for nothing. Of the original 108 ancient domains, 36 had been destroyed by the ancient demon, and now another one had fallen apart. However, this time the ancient court found its savior. Xianxia, an extraordinary being. Even though the emperor from the sacred land had escaped, it didn't matter. This time, the ancient court still emerged victorious. Long Gong once again became a great hero of the ancient court. As for Jian Wushuang and the other two, they didn't immediately reunite with Xianxia. Instead, they followed the ancient gate to an ancient domain belonging to the sacred land. The abyssal ancient domain. As the name suggests, this ancient domain lay within an abyss. But it wasn't at the bottom of the abyss. It was carved into the surrounding walls of the abyss, forming long corridors within it, stretching billions of miles in length and 1,000,000 miles wide. It rose to 90,000 miles in height. Though it felt somewhat oppressive, the power within the abyss was incredibly dense. It was an ideal place for cultivators to train. The abyssal realm had thus become the most unique place in the entire ancient domain. Jian Wushuang and his two companions secretly followed the ancient gate into the abyss, without immediately contacting Xianxia, because now Xianxia had the strength to protect herself. In fact, she could roam freely throughout the ancient domain. Whether they recognized each other sooner or later, it didn't matter. However, Jian Wushuang was particularly anxious about the emperor within the ancient gate. The silver puppets that the emperor had summoned were exactly the same as the ones left behind by the Divine Eye clan. It wasn't that they looked the same, but they had identical powers. This person was definitely connected to the Divine Eye clan. Either he had obtained the inheritance of the Divine Eye clan, or someone from the Divine Eye clan was supporting him. What Jian Wushuang currently lacked the most were powerful warriors from the Divine Eye clan. If he could secure another one, his strength would increase once again. They had now reached the 99th level of the abyssal realm. This corridor lay at the deepest part of the abyssal realm. It was the place where the energy was densest and also the most dangerous. Most practitioners could only reach this level, but the abyss was far deeper than that. There was a tale of someone throwing a Tao master servant down, and after months of descent, the servant still hadn't reached the bottom. But their consciousness and origin source were destroyed by an overwhelming force from the abyss below. Ultimately, they perished. Many had attempted to enter the abyss, but they all fell. Even now, some still believed that treasures existed within the abyss. But many more thought that a terrifying being resided in its depths. Standing at the edge of the abyssal corridor, Jian Wushuang and his two companions leaned on the railing, gazing down into the abyss. Brother Wushuang, you've seen much in your travels. Tell me, could this abyss be the abyss of the universe? Shuiyang asked. The abyss of the universe that Shuiyang referred to was something Jian Wushuang had heard of but never encountered. He had seen the abyss of time and space. It was the abyss connected to the river of time and space, and he had even ventured to its bottom. But it wasn't particularly special. He hadn't expected that the ancient domain would contain such an abyss. Moreover, monsters occasionally flew out from this abyss. However, their strength was weak. These creatures were strange, growing weaker the closer they were to the abyss's mouth. The most powerful monsters appearing at the 99th level were only at the Tao Master level. And the energy they wielded wasn't divine power but a destructive force. It equated to around 5,000 times the power of divine energy. A Holy Land Tao Master, whose strength rivaled that of an emperor, could easily crush them with a single hand. If an emperor were stationed here, they could even open up a new corridor. Jian Wushuang stared down into the abyss. It was different from the abyss he had seen before. If this were the abyss of time and space, there wouldn't be any strong beings living nearby. As for the universe abyss, he had heard of it but knew it didn't possess this kind of dark magic. An emperor could generally explore such a place with ease. But this abyss, even a holy lord couldn't deal with. Clearly, it wasn't the universe abyss. I'm not sure. It looks strange and is quite different from the abyss I encountered in the past. Jian Wushuang shook his head. Hearing this, Shuiyang's excitement grew. If even you haven't seen this before, Doesn't that mean this abyss might not exist in the outside realm? If we come back here after becoming an emperor or universe master, there's bound to be great treasures waiting for us. Haha, you're too naive. Immortal Jochun sneered. Based on what I know, this abyss is likely a passage. A passage? Jian Wushuang was stunned. Shuiyang scoffed at Zhou Chen's claim, dismissing it. You're full of it. What does a mere universe master's soul fragment know? I've told you countless times, the master of divine fire is a demigod. A demigod, with the potential to become a universe god, someone capable of ascending to the heavens. Jian Wushuang interrupted the two men's argument and said, Stop arguing. Tell me about this abyss, or the passage you mentioned. Immortal Jochun, upon hearing this, adopted a haughty demeanor and slowly began to speak. I also learned of this from the memories of the Lord of Divine Fire. This passage likely leads to a place of inheritance for the Divine Eye clan. Don't mistake it for those inheritances in the ancient domain. Those are trash. Though they were also established by a universe master of the Divine Eye clan, they can only impart the first 5 transformations. While the first 5 transformations can allow a universe master to dominate, the Lord of Divine Fire once accidentally entered an abyss, where he discovered a true inheritance site of the Divine Eye clan. There, he obtained the 9-Eye inheritance, which contains the complete 9 transformations secret art of the Divine Eye. From then on, his rise was meteoric. Becoming a universe god would have been an easy task for him, but unfortunately, he suddenly perished for reasons unknown. After finishing, Immortal Jochun sighed with some regret. If the Lord of Divine Fire hadn't fallen, there would have been no opportunity for him. Yet, his fall still evoked a sense of pity. After all, it was the perfect inheritance of the 9 transformations. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang was surprised and said, It seems that the inheritance the Lord of Divine Fire stumbled upon back then is the holy ground of the entire Divine Eye clan. The 9 transformations inheritance was something only Senior Brother Guiyen had. It must have been left behind by Senior Brother Guiyen, which was why the Lord of Divine Fire had called him Martial Uncle. Since he had obtained Senior Brother Guiyen's inheritance, he naturally became his disciple. So, there must be a great treasure down there. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. You could say that. However, entering it likely required a high standard. Without another word, and to the astonishment of the two men, Jian Wushuang leaped into the abyss. This scene left both Shuiyang and Immortal Jochun dumbfounded. Some of the powerful cultivators observing the abyss also gasped in shock when they saw Jian Wushuang jump in. Although people occasionally jumped into the abyss, not many had seen it happen with their own eyes. Look, another fool has jumped in. He seems fairly strong, an elder commented calmly. A younger cultivator sneered. What good is strength? Even an emperor would perish down there. He's probably just another bored cultivator seeking death. What a shame. Several others echoed similar sentiments. But it only stirred some brief excitement. Before long, everyone returned to their meditation and resumed cultivating. Meanwhile, Jian Wushuang plunged deeper into the abyss. He had already mastered the first 3 transformations of the 9 transformations secret art. The power within the abyss could not harm him. However, the further down he went, the more intense the mental assaults became. Jian Wushuang, possessing the consciousness of a realm beast, barely felt the assaults. It was nothing more than an itch to him. Even though the mental impact had reached a level capable of annihilating peak experts, it still didn't affect him. However, he dared not descend any further. The reason was that the number of monsters around him had increased dramatically. Each of them was at the peak level. Although Jian Wushuang had divine power equivalent to 50,000 times the strength of an ordinary universe god, aided by the leaves of the realm tree and the secret mental techniques, even he found it strenuous to deal with so many monsters. In short, his mental resilience was sufficient. His mastery of the Divine Eye secret art, however, was lacking. And in terms of combat strength, he was far behind. He had no choice but to fly back up. As long as his mind wasn't under threat, Jian Wushuang could fly back out of the abyss. Other cultivators, however, had their consciousness overwhelmed, preventing them from moving. They were forced to fall deeper into the abyss. The fortunate ones avoided monsters and were ultimately destroyed by the mental assaults. The unlucky ones encountered the monsters and were devoured on the spot. Jian Wushuang returned to the surface without alerting anyone. He simply reminded Immortal Zhoushan and Shuiyang, who were watching the abyss, and led them away from its edge. The corridor was wide. They entered the main city of the 99th floor corridor and temporarily settled there, waiting for the person they were tracking to appear. The man from the ancient gate was someone all three of them had met before. It was none other than Emperor Duobao, the one who had hosted the auction. He was also a disciple of Emperor Yuing. Yet he had unclear ties with the Holy Land. Of course, he didn't have any direct affiliation with the Holy Land. The reason he came here was to meet someone. Ling Xiaobo. After betraying his faction, Ling Xiaobo entered the Holy Land. A few days later, under the guise of visiting the Abyss, he met Emperor Duobao at the 99th floor corridor of the Abyss world. Jian Wushuang observed all of this. However, he had no idea what they discussed. When they met, the two of them entered the ancient gate. Jian Wushuang could sense the auras within the gate, but couldn't discern what they were saying. It was clear that they had shielded the time and space around them. Such an ability to block time and space wasn't something the ancient gate could achieve on its own. There was likely another treasure inside that Jian Wushuang wasn't aware of. Based on Ling Xiaobo's respectful attitude during their meeting, it was evident that Emperor Duobao held a higher status. He also possessed the most treasures. To avoid startling the enemy, Jian Wushuang didn't act immediately. Instead, after the meeting, he secretly followed Ling Xiaobo back to his residence. Late at night, inside the grand hall where Ling Xiaobo resided, the atmosphere was dark and dense with power. Tap. Jian Wushuang made no attempt to conceal himself as he walked directly toward Ling Xiaobo. Ling Xiaobo immediately noticed and quickly stood up. Who are you? Who I am doesn't matter. Who you are is what's important to me. With that, Jian Wushuang raised his hand and suppressed the space around them. Not only did he block Ling Xiaobo's escape route, but he also sealed off all methods of communication using thought power. In other words, there was no way for Ling Xiaobo to call for help. Not even Emperor Duobao would be alerted. What do you want? I'm warning you, you better not act recklessly, or you'll surely die. No one will be able to save you. Ling Xiaobo backed away, trying to contact Emperor Duobao, but he quickly realized his voice couldn't reach outside. With no other choice, he gave up and looked at Jian Wushuang. Taking a deep breath, he threatened, "Do you know who I am? Do you know what kind of power stands behind me? If you dare touch me, you'll die a horrible death. I might not touch you if you can show me a power capable of threatening my life." Jian Wushuang stood still, waiting for Ling Xiaobo to invoke the power behind him. If he presented a strong enough backing, perhaps Jian Wushuang would spare him. But if he didn't, well, Jian Wushuang wouldn't hesitate to deal with him. He didn't mind taking Ling Xiaobo's head to confront Emperor Duobao. Even if Ling Xiaobo had some backup plan, Jian Wushuang had prepared 5 golden armored puppets, capable of forcibly taking him down. The only concern was whether Ling Xiaobo had a final measure, like self-destruction, preventing him from being captured alive. Since the stakes were high, Jian Wushuang couldn't afford to be careless. "Go ahead, start your performance," Jian Wushuang said, controlling Ling Xiaobo with ease. If Ling Xiaobo dared to have any devious thoughts, Jian Wushuang could kill his soul instantly. Such was the unique power of the soul secret technique. It allowed him to kill without a trace. If not for the treasure guarding Ling Xiaobo's soul and the fact that he was under the protection of an emperor, Jian Wushuang could have used a soul search technique, transformed into Ling Xiaobo's likeness, infiltrated the Holy Land, and connected with Emperor Duobao. That would have been the perfect plan. Just kill me. Suddenly, Ling Xiaobo's expression shifted, seeking death. This abrupt resolve took Jian Wushuang by surprise. "What's this? Are you so willing to die for the Divine Eye Clan? Heh! You have no idea what true terror is." Ling Xiaobo sneered coldly. Jian Wushuang frowned, but this didn't pose much of a challenge to him. Since Ling Xiao boy wanted to die, Jian Wushuang would grant his wish. Soul retraction. Buzz. Ling Xiao's soul suddenly shot out from his divine body, transforming into a small ball, and began to shrink continuously. During the process of shrinking, Ling Xiao also entered an illusion. Before his eyes, Jian Wushuang disappeared, only to be replaced by Emperor Duobao. Brother Duobao, save me. Ling Xiao, as if sleepwalking, began to plead for help from Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang raised his hand and said, I have already saved your soul. He had exploited the weakness in Ling Xiao's heart and cast an illusion. Ling Xiao obediently fell into the trap Jian Wushuang had laid. Through this, Jian Wushuang delved into Ling Xiao's consciousness and uncovered the so-called secret. Emperor Duobao. He had long been possessed. This secret was indeed surprising. As for the one who possessed him, Ling Xiao wasn't entirely sure, but a new term appeared in Jian Wushuang's mind. The void. Emperor Duobao came from the void. He was a monster from the crevices of the void. Jian Wushuang frantically searched his memory, trying to recall anything about the void. In this world, he had never heard of it. But in the realm god continent, there had been an old rumor. When the realm god continent shattered, some powerful beings were trapped in fragments of it. These fragments eventually evolved into layers of the void, becoming part of the void itself. Over time, these people could not escape the shattered fragments and gradually fell into ruin, becoming fused with the void. If that were all, the outside world would not have known that the void housed a large group of mutated cultivators. However, after the realm god continent was rebuilt, those fallen beings from the void resurfaced. They brought quite a bit of trouble to the newly established realm god continent. But it was only minor trouble, as how many strong beings could the crevices of the void truly contain? No matter how weak the realm god continent became, it still had the 9-star universe gods. Dealing with those fallen void cultivators was not a difficult task. If the realm god continent had void cultivators, then this world likely did as well. After all, both were fragments of the shattered realm god continent. In fact, this world could be said to exist within a crevice of the void itself. So the existence of the void was not surprising. It was just that this was the first time he had heard of it since entering this world. It also differed somewhat from his expectations. He had initially thought it was related to the Divine Eye clan. He hadn't expected the void to be involved. Compared to the Divine Eye clan, the void had an even more tragic fate. Back then, they had clearly been victims, but after being absorbed into the fragments and assimilated by the void, even if they later managed to break into the realm god continent, they were regarded as monsters. This was because these void cultivators had already been tainted with the aura of the realm beasts. They devoured cultivators. They had become true demons, not much different from demonic creatures. In the end, all the void cultivators that appeared on the realm god continent were slain. The only difference between them and demonic creatures was that they retained their original memories, but they could no longer control their urge to devour. In the end, the powerhouses of the new realm god continent were slain one by one. They became stepping stones for newcomers. The void cultivators were truly pitiful. But this had nothing to do with Jian Wushuang. Is Duobao backed by the void? But why would they help the Holy Lord? Jian Wushuang was a bit curious. Or perhaps, they weren't helping the Holy Lord at all and just wanted to stir up internal strife in the ancient domain world, taking the opportunity to devour it? That wasn't impossible. He sent a message to Immortal Zhouchen, asking about the void. From Zhouchen's words, Jian Wushuang learned that the void had appeared before. Back then, the Lord of Divine Fire encountered quite a few of them. However, their strength was very weak. To grow stronger, they needed to control a major world, devouring all the cultivators within it, and transferring their accumulated cultivation into a divine body. Using one major world, they could nurture a supreme powerhouse. Then, two would merge and devour more worlds, until they eventually became universe masters. But that was extremely difficult. Usually, by the time they devoured their second or even third world, they would be detected by a universe master, and from that point they wouldn't be able to escape being killed. After all, for the Void to become a universe master, they first needed to devour the origin source of the universe. Although there weren't many universe masters in this universe, the range of their exploration was vast. In this universe alone, there were likely more than one universe master. Each of them could explore this universe thoroughly. The Void would barely reveal themselves before being slain. However, when devouring the first world, due to their inherent weakness, they wouldn't be detected unless a universe master was constantly probing the entire universe. The chances of that were extremely low. If it happened, it could only be said that the Void cultivator was incredibly unlucky. Void. Jian Wushuang was a bit disappointed. He had thought it might be related to the Divine Eye clan, but it turned out to be the Void, and he instantly lost all interest. However, he still inquired about the details of Emperor Duobao. He came from the Void and was its representative. As for Ling Xiao, he was merely a puppet of Emperor Duobao. Within his soul was the Void's mark, and if he ever revealed Duobao's secrets, his soul would be obliterated. Even if someone used a soul search, he would still be killed. Only when facing Void cultivators could he speak the truth. Whether in illusions or in reality, Jian Wushuang could replicate the aura of a Void cultivator. At that moment, he tore away the disguise and transformed into the appearance of a Void cultivator. Ling Xiao. Where has the Holy Lord gone? Ling Xiao, in his dazed state, muttered. The Holy Lord has already perished. What is Emperor Duobao's next goal? Does he have any connection with the Divine Eye clan? Emperor Duobao ordered me to stir up trouble in the Holy Land and prepare for a decisive battle with the ancient court. I never heard him mention the Divine Eye clan, but I know he once found a Divine Eye clan relic in the Chaos Void. This explained how Duobao had been able to summon a Divine Eye clan puppet earlier. After extracting all the valuable information, Jian Wushuang spared Ling Xiao's life. It wasn't because he was soft-hearted, but because killing him would be pointless. In fact, it would only make Emperor Duobao more suspicious. Duobao's goal was to devour the ancient domain world, which didn't have much to do with Jian Wushuang. However, the treasures on Emperor Duobao's body were of some use to him. He had run out of divine blood. If Emperor Duobao still had some left, Jian Wushuang could use it to transform into a universe god of the Divine Eye clan, allowing him to mass-produce golden-armored puppets. The lack of top-tier combat strength around him constantly made him feel insecure. If he encountered a cultivator from the Divine clan, he wouldn't have the power to suppress them. Against supreme combat strength, he could rely on numbers to win. But against those above Tier 3, it would be much harder. They were comparable to Universe Masters, and no matter how many golden armored puppets he had, they might still be useless. It seems I need to place all my bets on Zhang and I. Jian Wushuang sighed inwardly. He hadn't expected Zhang and I to be so powerful. It was a pleasant surprise. But relying on his little niece to fight for him made him feel a bit embarrassed. At times, he realized he still needed to cultivate his own forces. For example, Void cultivators. He was quite interested in this. If he could cultivate a universe master from the Void clan, then by giving them a microscopic universe to devour, they could directly become a demigod. After all, each microscopic universe was an ultimate universe body. The most perfect of universes, almost comparable to the origin source of a universe god. He possessed the boundless body, which could help conceal everything for the other party. Confuse the universe master. Void. Jian Wushuang's figure left the courtyard. He took Shuiyang and Immortal Jiuchen with him, departing from the Abyss world and heading toward the ancient court world. During the years of silence, the ancient domain world had undergone even greater changes. The Holy Land counterattacked, regaining its original territory. Now, both sides were once again evenly matched. The fighting grew fiercer. At the same time, the news of the Holy Master's fall had spread. This ignited a burning fighting spirit in the once dispirited strongmen of the ancient court. The first battlefield at the border was the shattered sea-covering world from several years ago. This place had become the first battlefield in the domain war. Every day battles erupted. It was common for Dao masters to join the fray, and even the emperor, who had previously been imprisoned, personally oversaw this battlefield. However, this time he brought a supreme innate treasure with him. Single-handedly, he suppressed 9 Tier 3 emperors, mercilessly crushing them. If it weren't for Lord Long holding the line, the entire battlefield would have been breached long ago. For now, both sides remained somewhat restrained, with emperors rarely entering the battlefield. The Dao Masters had become the main combat force. Every day, teams were formed to engage in brutal skirmishes. Of course, as battles grew fiercer, more Dao Masters were drawn in, escalating the conflict. One could say there was a minor battle every 3 days and a major battle every 5 days. At times, more than 1,000 Dao Masters would engage in combat simultaneously. The ancient court had no choice but to band together. Now, both sides were seeking opportunities, looking for ways to turn the tide. The intensity was unimaginable. Yet, both sides fought fiercely, each with the confidence of devouring the other. After all, the 3 emperors of the Holy Land could join forces to overpower the ancient court, giving them an advantage. The ancient court had no choice but to band together. Now, both sides were seeking opportunities, looking for ways to turn the tide. They were also preparing their trump cards. For instance, the ancient court had just recruited an unparalleled Dao Master. Xianxia. She had been personally recruited by Lord Long into the ancient court and was currently cultivating there. However, it was not for the purpose of achieving unity. Rather, it was to comprehend the Tao of life. Once she elevated the origin source of life to a perfected Tao master level, achieving perfection in both ultimate Taos, Xianxia's combat power would soar to the absolute pinnacle. By then, she could sweep through the entire Holy Land. If it weren't for Jian Wushuang's earlier probing, which made the ancient court more cautious, Xianxia would likely have already led the ancient court in sweeping through the Holy Land by now. But Jian Wushuang's trip to the ancient court this time wasn't because of Xianxia. Right now, Xianxia's strength was still insufficient. She still needed more tempering. It wouldn't be too late to reunite with her once he left the ancient domain world. His current target was the Emperor Duobao. According to Ling Xiaobo, Emperor Duobao had already returned to the ancient court. Jian Wushuang planned to lie in wait in the ancient court, awaiting the right moment. He wasn't planning to strike directly but intended to wait for Emperor Duobao to make a move on the ancient domain world. At that time, Jian Wushuang would seize the opportunity to suppress a fully fledged void cultivator. Then enslave the other party, helping them devour the origin source of the universe and become the universe master. By then, they would devour the microcosm, becoming a super strong demigod at the peak. At that time, not only would the 4th tribulation be nothing, but even the 5th and 6th tribulations could be suppressed easily. He would then aim for the beast's king-level origin source. A king-level beast, a precursor to the divine king. Such a being was worthy of opening up the starry sky. There were likely very few of such beings in the land of disorder. By then, his strength would surpass even the prophet from his memory, becoming even stronger. In the future, he could also aid Master Xianxia. He definitely didn't want to die again. The boundary, a flying boat weaved through the chaotic currents, its movement strange. Within the turbulent flow, the boat darted here and there, yet never crossed the boundary. To outsiders, it seemed like it was just circling in place. Buzz, still haven't found it? Reporting to the general, the position of the void gate often shifts, so it's normal to not find it right away. We just need to keep trying, and we'll find it eventually. Aboard the boat, a soul entity clad in black battle armor shouted angrily, "Keep trying? How long will that take? This time entering the void gate is the one and only chance in billions of years to break free from the cage. We have waited a long time. We cannot disappoint the ancestors trapped inside the void. We must locate the void gate quickly." Understood. The soul entity controlling the boat responded repeatedly, continuing the search for the void gate. Their luck was surprisingly good. After trying hundreds of thousands of times, they finally located the void gate, and the entire boat silently slipped into a black hole. The black hole vanished, and the turbulent flow remained the same. Not long after, another flying boat passed through the chaotic currents. Inside this boat's cockpit, Jian Wushuang stood in front of a transparent window, gazing out at the turbulence. Quite the daring lot, these void cultivators. They hid their dark gate here of all places. On his journey to the ancient court, Jian Wushuang had encountered a peculiar flying boat and had been following it ever since. A strange boat, manned by strange cultivators. All of it connected to the void. Unexpectedly, he'd stumbled upon a big catch. Right in front of him, they had entered the void. Jian Wushuang could easily open the void gate. But even if he did, entering wouldn't serve much purpose. At best, he could wipe out those void cultivators. The ancient domain was small, and the void fissure within the ancient domain could not possibly harbor two powerful cultivators. At most, they'd be Tier 5 or Tier 6 emperors. Such a small place couldn't possibly support the existence of supreme beings. Even if they held a supreme position in the void, without a divine body, their combat power remained weak. They were no match for Jian Wushuang. But there was no need to act right now. It would be better to control everything from the shadows, like a farmer waiting to pick ripe fruit. Should we go in? Immortal Zhouchen asked. Jian Wushuang shook his head. It wasn't yet time for his performance. Let's head to the ancient court. I need to check on Zhang and I. Her second ultimate Dao should be nearing completion. For now, all he needed to do was sit back and watch. It wasn't worth his time to intervene. Unless it involved someone from the God Eye clan. Just like in the mortal realm, he hardly ever intervened, especially as his strength continued to grow. Whenever he did act, it was either a matter of great importance or life-threatening danger. Otherwise, there was no reason for him to get involved. The flying boat passed through the overturning sea battlefield, entering the 36 ancient domains controlled by the ancient court. Jian Wushuang and his party arrived at the main stronghold of the ancient court. The ancient domain star. This world was an ancient star. Though a star, it was incomparably vast. Stretching across the north and south, it was larger than most ancient domains. If a grand completion cultivator were to fly 1,000 miles per breath, it would take them 10,000 years to traverse the entire ancient domain star. Rumor had it that this was still the core of the ancient domain world. There was great fortune to be found here. However, it had always been dominated by the heavenly court. Even the Holy Lord back then could do nothing about this place. As a result, no one dared to covet it. One of the main reasons Jian Wushuang had come this time was because of the ancient domain star. While it could block the Holy Lord's Tier 6 power, it couldn't stop him. Floating outside the ancient domain star, Guardian Yunhai respectfully introduced, Lord, entering the ancient domain star is quite troublesome. You need to pay a deposit and undergo an identity check. If your identity isn't registered in the ancient domain world, you'll need to pay an even higher deposit. They're keeping it under strict control, Jian Wushuang remarked, casting a glance at the flying ships in the void behind him. With a thought, one of the normally flying ships vanished from the void in an instant. Several other ships flew by, unaware of the strange event that had just occurred. Jian Wushuang extended his palm, and the ship that had just been outside was now floating in his hand. This scene left Guardian Yunhai and the others utterly shocked. Even Immortal Zhouchen found it incredibly astonishing. This is mastery over space at its peak, Immortal Zhouchen exclaimed in awe. He had seen the Lord of Divine Fire, a powerful demigod. The Lord of Divine Fire had long mastered space, but compared to Jian Wushuang's technique just now, even the Lord of Divine Fire seemed somewhat clumsy. It couldn't be helped. The Lord of Divine Fire's origin source universe was probably no larger than a 1,000-fold universe. But Jian Wushuang had almost cultivated the river of time and space back in the day. His foundation was the 10,000-fold origin source universe. A 10,000-fold origin source universe placed him among the peak 9-star universe gods. Among 9-star universe gods, Jian Wushuang was already invincible. Of course, all of this was thanks to the will of the realm beast. Now that he had fully become a realm beast, once he returned to his peak, he would be able to surpass universe gods. Although he didn't dare claim to rival the god of time and space, he would at least have part of their strength. After all, he had only ever seen one god of time and space, and that person hadn't even made a move, so he didn't know the true power of a god of time and space. After transforming into a realm beast, Jian Wushuang had developed unique insights into the exploration of origin source. His future potential would only continue to rise. "Are the 6 of you also planning to visit the ancient domain star?" he asked. Guardian Yunhai and the others were immediately both surprised and flattered. Seeing their expressions, Jian Wushuang didn't hold back. He directly retrieved 9 bodies from the ship in his palm. "These are all true immortals, complete with identity information. Take a look. You can use their identities later." "Thank you, Lord." The 6 of them were deeply grateful. Although they now possessed near-invincible strength, their knowledge was still somewhat lacking. They were eager to see what the ancient domain star had to offer. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly and said, "You've been calling me Lord, but I haven't even established a proper force yet. Now that you've got me thinking about it, when we enter the ancient domain star, I'll find some good sword talents and establish a sword pavilion where the sword reigns supreme. Lord Wushuang, your name will spread across the entire universe." Shuiyang and Immortal Zhou couldn't help but mock. "Jian Wushuang is being puffed up by all your praises." Outside the 9th teleportation array of the ancient star domain. "Flying boat ahead. Halt immediately." A Taoist lord clad in black battle armor spoke with authority. On the chest of his battle armor was the character for General. This was a general among the heavenly soldiers of the ancient court. He possessed the combat power of a Taoist lord, commanding an army of 10,000 true immortals under his banner. As the name suggested, his army consisted of 10,000 true immortals. Additionally, he oversaw a preparatory camp of true immortals, which included 1,000,000 cultivators in the Great Ascension stage, continuously replenishing his ranks of true immortals. Of course, not all the heavenly soldiers were at the 9th step of true immortal. Those who could attain the 9th step of true immortal in the heavenly soldiers were given positions, such as commanders within the ranks of the heavenly soldiers. Some even achieved the rank of Great Commander, capable of leading 5,000 heavenly soldiers. And this was only among the elites of the heavenly soldiers in the ancient court. Beyond the heavenly soldiers in the heavenly hall, there were also the Pill Hall, the Tao Hall, the Immortal Hall, the Secret Hall, and others. After all, after developing for hundreds of thousands of years, the ancient court had an absolutely perfect system. Take the generals of the heavenly hall, for instance. Each general was like an individual entity. They nurtured their own heavenly soldiers. It just so happened that the prestigious position overseeing the 9th teleportation array had fallen into the hands of a general from the heavenly hall. It was well known that the daily collection of security deposits amounted to an astronomical figure. After intercepting a flying boat, the general personally stepped forward to question them. This was because the flying boat held 3 Taoist lords. It required his personal involvement. If it had been just one Taoist lord, he wouldn't have needed to appear. Swish! The flying boat came to a halt, and 9 figures emerged. Leading them was an elegant young master, exuding wealth and nobility, with a fan in hand. "General Li, it's been a long time," the noble young master greeted warmly, stepping forward. "It's been 3,000 years since we last met." Recognizing an old acquaintance, General Li relaxed a little and said calmly, "It has been some time. Brother Shangguan, your strength seems to have improved considerably over the years. Could it be that this time you're confident in breaking through to the 7th level of the ancient tower? I've gained some insights and came to give it a try. You know, my father has just..." Shangguan sighed. Upon hearing this, General Li's expression grew more solemn. He said, "Shangguan, I've heard about your father's situation. I never expected the war this time to be so severe, even involving the emperor. But don't worry, we all support you in taking over as the Sword Pavilion Master. With us old brothers by your side, that traitor won't stand a chance." Shangguan, moved, replied, "At this crucial moment, I'll have to rely on all of you. This is nothing. I was also once part of the Sword Pavilion. Though the old Pavilion Master has fallen, the legacy remains, and so do our fellow disciples." General Li patted his chest in reassurance. After a bit of small talk, Shangguan took out a mustard seed-sized object and said, "Brother Li, we'll head inside first." See you again in the ancient star domain. General Li did not hesitate and accepted the mustard seed. This was the rule. Even if it was his own father, they still had to give a deposit. Because money could be returned. But before it was returned, they could use it. If there was no money to return, they would have to use the travel pass as collateral. Otherwise, how could he feed his 10,000 soldiers and 100,000 reserves? Shangguan and his group entered the teleportation array and disappeared in an instant. When they reappeared, they were already on the ancient domain star. There was only one city within the ancient domain star, but it covered most of the star. Outside the city was the wilderness, full of various demonic beasts. Some were even of the emperor level. The reason they weren't completely suppressed was to train the cultivators. The Lord of the Ancient Court's method was quite good. By leaving some threats behind, he could better stimulate the cultivators' potential. Tianyong City, a very familiar name. The city was named Tianyong because, above it, 9 heavens floated. This was the ancient court. 9 layers of heaven. Only the cultivators of the ancient court could enter the 9 heavens. The 9 heavens were also divided into 9 levels. The true 9 heavens was the birthplace of the ancient court. To ascend to the 9 heavens, one had to become an emperor. Otherwise, they had no qualification to reach the 9 heavens. The first 8 layers were still manageable. Besides the requirement of status, there were no realm restrictions. Some of the descendants of emperors, even if they hadn't become true immortals, could still go to the 8th heaven to cultivate. The entire 9 heavens, starting from the first level, saw the aura of the world's origin source grow stronger with each ascended level. By the time one reached the 9th heaven, it was the place with the richest origin source in the ancient moon world, except for the Holy Lands. Of course, compared to the universe's origin source, the difference was immeasurable. In Tianyong City, within a certain teleportation array in the southern city, Jian Wushuang and the others casually walked out. Wushuang, I must say, your acting skills are really something. You were chatting so warmly with that senior brother, Li, just now that I almost thought your body had been taken over by the consciousness of this identity. Shuiyang couldn't help but praise. Jian Wushuang smiled faintly and said, I've already absorbed all of Shangguan Yu's memories. I'm completely aware of everything he experienced, so naturally, I can evoke all the right emotions. It's no surprise the other party didn't detect anything wrong. Earlier, the 9 people at the 9th teleportation array were Jian Wushuang and his group. The identity Jian Wushuang had chosen, while it couldn't access the 9 heavens, allowed him to roam freely anywhere. If he had picked a weaker identity, he would have been timid and cautious even on the ancient domain star. That's why he chose Shangguan Yu's identity. As for the original owner, Jian Wushuang had thrown him into the universe's origin source on the 3rd level of the 9 prison pagoda. He had only scanned the other's soul and reviewed his memories. The others needed the body, though. The original soul consciousness was also thrown into the universe's origin source. It was essentially a forced transaction. But once inside the universe's origin source, the original owner had already come to terms with it. Maybe, in time, he would emerge as an emperor. That wasn't impossible. Lord, the ancient domain star has 3 treasures. The first is the ancient tower, the second is the 9 heavens, and the third is the underground palace. Jian Wushuang nodded and said, I know. The ancient tower contains the world's origin source, which can test the strength of Tao Lords. As for the 9 heavens, no need to say more. The third, the underground palace, is worth checking out. He had absorbed Shangguan Yu's memories and was very familiar with the ancient domain star. After all, in the memories, Shangguan Yu had grown up on this star. He was the eldest son of an emperor in the ancient court. A peak Tao Lord even stronger than the two-faced Buddha. His divine body was 5,000 times stronger, and his origin source was already at the edge of merging with the Tao, with his origin Tao being 2nd grade. Once he successfully merged with the Tao, he would become a Tier 2 emperor. After cultivating the world's origin source, he could quickly rise to a Tier 3 emperor. Strictly speaking, Shangguan Yu was a prodigy. Unfortunately, before a prodigy could become a true powerhouse, his father had perished. Shangguan Xian, the sword pavilion lord of the ancient court. The ancient court had two great sword pavilions. One belonged to Emperor Yuing, and the other to Xianxia. However, Xianxia's strength was inferior to Emperor Yu Ying's. He had always been overshadowed, and now that Xianxia had fallen, Emperor Yuing had returned from the battlefield. As war was imminent, he aimed to swallow up the sword pavilion Xianxia had established to expand his power and ensure the greatest advantage in the coming conflict. Moreover, the negotiations were almost complete. Xianxia's chief disciple, Clear Water Sword Immortal, had already been bribed by Emperor Duobao, a disciple of Emperor Yuing. The original purpose of Xianguan Yu's visit this time was because he had been notified to come and relocate the sword pavilion. Xianguan Yu had been wandering outside, training and cultivating. The sudden bad news had yet to be fully processed, and immediately after, he learned that the sword pavilion his father had built was going to be taken over. He had come to Ancient Star Domain to protect the sword pavilion. Jian Wushuang's visit to the Ancient Star Domain had two purposes: to secretly check on Zhang and I and to uncover what secrets the Ancient Star Domain held. As for Xianguan Yu's matters, Jian Wushuang thought he could resolve them easily. After all, for him it was a simple task. Since he had taken on Xianguan Yu's identity, helping him with a small favor seemed only fair. Just after stepping out of the teleportation array's plaza, a man and a woman, both Dao Lords, walked towards him. The man wore a white long robe, and the woman donned a blue and white skirt. "Junior brother Xianguan, you've finally arrived. Hurry and return with us to the sword pavilion. Master's coffin is in Tianyong City, and tonight is the morning assembly. Many seniors from different factions will be attending. We'll need you to preside over the ceremony." Xianguan Yu glanced coldly at the two of them, a mocking smile on his face. "Preside? How laughable. When you sold the sword pavilion, did you even think of me?" Jian Wushuang tried to mimic Xianguan Yu's tone and character as much as possible. "By the way, where's senior brother Zhao Qing? Why didn't you ask him to preside? Could it be that he has already gone to Yu Ying's sword pavilion?" The two looked embarrassed upon hearing this. The female Dao Lord explained, "Senior brother is receiving important guests and couldn't spare the time, but he will come later." "Humph!" Xianguan Yu sneered. "Traitorous scoundrels, finding new masters and forgetting your old ones." After speaking, he waved his sleeve and left. The people behind them also ignored the two as they followed Xianguan Yu. However, Jian Wushuang's direction was still towards Xianguan's coffin. After all, he had to go there. When they arrived, they found hundreds of sword pavilion disciples guarding the coffin. Among them, 78 were Dao Lords, and the rest were true immortals. Most notably, the majority were 9-step true immortals. Their strength was far superior to the so-called top 10 true immortals of the past from the Two-Faced Divine Mansion. Of course, except for Chu Xiong. However, a few of the sword immortals could rival Chu Xiong in talent and ability. When the crowd saw Xianguan Yu arrive, their expressions were complex. Most had already chosen to follow senior brother. However, some of the elders cared more about the opinions of the young master, unwilling to see the sword pavilion sold off so easily. They feared being trampled on once again. After all, back when the old pavilion master was alive, Yu Ying's pavilion looked down on them. This was because Yu Ying's pavilion had produced an emperor. Emperor Yu Ying was also one of the top 10 emperors of the ancient court. In terms of strength, foundation, and connections, they were far beyond what Xianguan could compare to. Junior brother, senior brother Xianguan. Although they harbored their own thoughts and schemes, they still gave this young master face, rising to greet him and expressing their sorrow and helplessness. Xianguan Yu kept a cold expression, nodding slightly in acknowledgement as he walked towards the coffin. Inside were only the old clothes that Xianguan had worn, along with a broken treasure battle armor. His physical body and divine form had been destroyed during the battle. Seeing the tattered battle armor and the broken divine sword, Xianguan Yu could no longer contain his emotions. He broke down in tears. This display left Xiangyang, who was following behind, thoroughly impressed. He couldn't help but send a voice transmission to Zhou Qian. "Old man, you should learn from this. Look at how brother Wushuang acts. It's like he's truly mourning his father. When my own father died, I didn't cry as genuinely as this. Zhou Chun replied with a blank expression. When the master of divine flame perished, I wanted to cry but couldn't. In this regard, Jian Wushuang truly surpasses me. As Shangguanyu wept, he gently caressed the broken sword. In his heart, Jian Wushuang couldn't help but admire this unorthodox sword cultivator. Although his origin source was weak, and his battle power was only top tier for the second tier, in that battle, he had exchanged 3 blows with a top-tier 5th-tier emperor. His death was not in vain. After burning through his divine body, sacrificing his physical body, and finally even having his soul collapse, he had perished. He had been aware of that great battle. It was the most intense battle between the ancient court and the Holy Land. In the end, both sides suffered significant losses and withdrew. The only reason Jian and I didn't participate was that, otherwise, this person wouldn't have fallen. Nighttime, the memorial service officially began. Guests from all directions arrived, with emperors occasionally making appearances. After all, it was an emperor who had fallen, a huge loss for the ancient court. Though this emperor was only a tier 2 emperor, the entire ancient court had only a few dozen emperors. From Dongxue Pavilion, Emperor Yuqing has arrived to pay his respects. Shangguanyu quickly stood up, leading several of his father's direct disciples to offer incense. This Emperor Yuqing was a top-tier, tier 3 emperor, one of the 10 great emperors of the ancient court. His status was high, and his strength formidable, on the same level as Emperor Yuing. Naturally, Shangguanyu had to treat him with respect. After paying his respects, Emperor Yuqing turned to Shangguanyu and said, "If you ever need anything, feel free to come to me. This sword pavilion was established by your father, and you must take good care of it. I will follow your teachings." Shangguanyu obediently nodded. Just from his tone, Shangguanyu could tell that this emperor was on his father's side. He had already made his support clear. This memorial service was, in fact, a show of allegiance. Some people scorned such alliances, while others took a stand in support of their friends' descendants. "Emperor Yuing has arrived," a voice announced from outside. A majestic man wearing a moon-patterned robe entered. Behind him followed a man and a woman. "Yuqing, you're here as well." Emperor Yuing entered with a casual tone, but his aura was imposing. The 2 people behind him were Shangguanyu's senior disciple brother and the daughter of Emperor Yuing, whom Jian Wushuang had met before. He hadn't expected to meet her here again, under such circumstances. Emperor Yuqing glanced at the other man, but then turned his cold gaze toward Shangguanyu's senior disciple brother and said coldly, "Humph, your master just perished, and you've already switched allegiances. What a fine way to honor your teacher. Haha. Why get so worked up over matters between the younger generation?" Emperor Yuing said with a smile. "Besides, I've already decided to take him as my son-in-law. In the future, there will be only one sword pavilion in the ancient court. Isn't that a good thing? Yuing, your day will come too. Don't get too smug," Emperor Yuqing retorted coldly. As the host, Shangguanyu had no choice but to step in and interrupt their argument. "Emperor Yuing, please offer your incense." He handed over a stick of incense as he spoke. According to tradition, as a mere Tao lord, how could he dare to argue with emperors? No matter what was said, he had to endure it. The ancient court was the hope of the human race. But internally, it was still plagued by various struggles. The more united they were in external battles, the more chaotic they were within. After finally quelling the dispute between the 2 emperors, the memorial service continued smoothly. More and more prominent figures arrived. There were thousands of Tao lords and over a dozen emperors in attendance. The 2 most powerful individuals were Emperor Yuing and Emperor Yuqing, each standing on opposite sides. On one side was Shangguanyu's senior disciple brother, Zhao Qing. Jian Wushuang was an incredibly powerful cultivator, known as the Clearwater Sword Immortal. He was also the top disciple under Shangguanshen and had successfully passed the 7th level of the ancient tower. His strength far surpassed that of Shangguan at the time. Of course, Shangguanyu, whom Jian Wushuang had taken, also possessed the strength to pass the 7th level but had been too preoccupied with his adventures to attempt it. Zhao Qing, on the other hand, had the support of Emperor Yuing and several Tier 2 emperors. Needless to say, numerous Dao Lords also stood by his side. The Grand Hall was divided, with both factions representing different forces. Shangguan Yu's side was not lacking in power either. Emperor Yuqing led the charge, accompanied by several emperors who had close ties with Shangguan Xian. There were also many Dao Lords, most of whom held significant positions like those Dao Lords brought by senior brother Li, who were generals within the Heavenly Soldiers. Their strength had been proven by passing the 6th level of the Ancient Tower. The Ancient Tower was divided into 9 levels and had 3 towers in total. The first tower was for mortals, from the innate stage to the Mahayana stage. The second tower was for Dao Lords, with its 9 levels representing the limits of a Dao Lord. Zhao Qing had passed the 7th level, which signified the limit of a Dao Lord's power. His divine power had multiplied 5,000-fold. His origin source had reached perfection, and it was a top-tier origin source. His strength was now comparable to that of a Tier 1 emperor. In the history of the ancient court, there had been fewer than 100 Dao Lords who had passed the 7th level. Of those, 99% had failed in merging with the Dao. The few who had succeeded wielded the power of a Tier 4 emperor. This was why Zhao Qing had garnered a lot of support. Some of the emperors who were on good terms with Shangguan Xian were rooting for him, although they doubted his character. After all, his greed was undeniable. Upon further reflection, it became clear that Zhao Qing had reached the brink of merging with the Dao and was eager to succeed. He cared little for the power his master left behind. However, to successfully merge with the Dao, he needed an enormous amount of resources. Currently, the ancient court had 4 Dao Lords who had passed the 7th level, all preparing to merge with the Dao. However, there were limited treasures available for the merger, and for individuals would not be able to split them evenly. In this world, background was everything. Aside from Zhao Qing, the other 3 Dao Lords who had passed the 7th level had incredibly strong backgrounds. The first Dao Lord to pass the 7th level was a disciple of Dragon Lord, one of the founding ministers of the ancient court. Both of the subsequent celestial kings were also his disciples. Dragon Lord was someone even the great heavenly venerable Yuanzhang had to show respect to. Though Dragon Lord was above granting favors to his disciples, the ancient court was still more inclined to support his protégés because of their legacy. Zhao Qing could not compare to that. The second Dao Lord was a disciple of the celestial king of the 2nd generation, real Master Sankai, another impossible background to match. The third Dao Lord had a relatively ordinary background. His master was merely a Dao Lord, and he hailed from a humble barbarian village. However, his talent was exceptional. He had comprehended 2 top-tier origin sources and was the strongest among them all. He had even caught the attention of the current celestial king, Bai Yu, who, though not accepting him as a disciple, promised to give him special treatment. After all, the strongest talent and power would naturally receive the greatest support. Then there was Zhao Qing. He was the personal disciple of Shangguan Xian, the top disciple of the Sword Pavilion. His position, status, and strength were all formidable. However, after his master's sudden death, everything crumbled. Zhao Qing wanted to protect the Sword Pavilion, but with what? He could barely take care of himself, let alone ensure a future for his fellow disciples. At this critical juncture, Emperor Yuing came to him with an irresistible offer: marriage into the emperor's family. He would become the emperor's son-in-law, receive the favor of Emperor Duobao, and be provided with all the necessary treasures for merging with the Dao. Faced with this condition, he couldn't refuse. Emperor Yuing wasn't foolish either. He was fully aware of his daughter's worth, and marrying her to Zhao Qing was clearly aiming high. Moreover, having Zhao Qing bring the entire Sword Pavilion to pledge allegiance was an incredibly profitable deal. As for the few precious treasures that would be spent, he didn't care. His disciples would cover the cost. It was, in essence, a purely profitable arrangement. The current dispute between the two sides was merely about saving face. In the end, Emperor Yuing would win, because in the ancient court, strength was what truly spoke. Shangguan Xian had fallen, and without an emperor, the sword pavilion would be swallowed up. A sword pavilion without an emperor could no longer be called the sword pavilion. Shangguan Yu couldn't hold onto it. A Tao master of the 6th level in the ancient tower had no voice in the matter, even though he was the son of an emperor. But without the emperor, how many cards did this son truly have left to play? As more and more people came to offer condolences, the gap between the two sides widened. Shangguan Yu's side was only supported by a few die-hard loyalists. But these people didn't have much faith in Shangguan Yu. They were merely sticking around out of loyalty. On the other hand, Zhao Qing's side seemed to have already decided that the sword pavilion would be swallowed up. Shangguan Yu would face utter defeat. At that moment, another name was announced from outside. Lord Long has arrived. Upon hearing that Lord Long had arrived, everyone grew solemn. He was the foundation of the ancient court, its greatest contributor. Though he hadn't ascended to the rank of true immortal, he was a figure whom even the 3 immortal kings treated with equality. A Tier 4 emperor in combat power, Lord Long was one of the most powerful figures in the entire ancient domain world. His arrival calmed the tense atmosphere. The imposing elder, with a commanding presence, strode into the grand hall. Following behind him was a woman dressed in white. The woman's brow carried a hint of coldness, but her eyes were soft. Sword energy resided in her heart, and life in her spirit. Upon seeing the woman, Shangguan Yu's heart stirred. Zhang and I. He hadn't expected Zhang and I to come. By all rights, Zhang and I had only recently arrived at the ancient court and probably didn't know Shangguan Xian well. At most, they'd exchanged greetings. Her presence here showed great respect to the deceased. What shocked him even more was that Zhang Ni's aura had grown significantly stronger. It seemed that her mastery over the origin source of life had reached perfection. She had now perfected 2 ultimate origins. Zhang Ni's combat power had likely reached the pinnacle. Terrifying. Although she was still a Tao master, she was the strongest in the entire ancient domain world. No one could stand against her. Not even the void cultivators or the holy lords who had not yet fallen could be her match. Even Jian Wushuang himself wasn't confident in defeating the current Zhang and I. There was nothing he could do. She was in her prime, while he, a universe master, without the divine blood of the Divine Eye clan transforming him into a golden armored puppet, didn't even have peak-level combat power. The only way he could win against Zhang and I was through a soul attack. Lord Long's arrival eased the tension in the hall. When everyone saw Zhang and I, many of them showed cold expressions. This was because Zhang and I hadn't even joined the ancient court halfway through. She had only just joined. She wasn't here just to pay respects to Shangguan Xian. Rather, right after joining the ancient court, she was granted the unprecedented privilege of ascending to the 9th heaven as a Tao master. This was something only the emperor knew. None of the Tao masters were aware. Besides the 9th heaven, a special treasure trove deep within the court's underground cellar, accessible only to the immortal kings of the ancient court, had also been opened, specifically for Zhang and I. This was a top-secret matter, known only to Emperor Yuqing and Emperor Yuing. They held a deep grudge over this. There was nothing they could do. Their levels were too low to comprehend just how terrifying Zhang Ni's strength truly was. If she wished, a single sword could shatter the entire ancient domain world. Others might not understand, but Lord Long was well aware. He fully grasped what Zhang and I represented. Right now, the ancient court was fighting over the legacy of the ancient domain world, but in the future, the ancient domain world would face the entire chaotic universe. At that time, the strong ones required would not be emperors, but supreme beings surpassing the level of emperors. And within the current ancient domain world, he saw no juniors capable of reaching such heights. Until he met Zhang and I, he saw hope. This was not the hope of the ancient court. It was the hope of the ancient domain world. A person who, at the Tao Lord level, could unleash combat power that surpassed that of a Tier 5 emperor. As for her future achievements, he dared not even imagine. Let alone some special places opening up. What difference would it make if they handed over the ancient court to Zhang and I right now? Therefore, Lord Long didn't care about others' opinions. He explained his reasoning only to the three immortal kings of the ancient court. The three immortal kings, primordial lord Yuanjing, master of three talents, and immortal king Bai Yu, all wholeheartedly supported his actions. Because this concerned the future of the ancient domain world. There was nothing to be afraid of. 152 After finishing his offering of incense, Lord Long's gaze toward the crowd changed. It was a shift in perspective. As a result, Lord Long no longer feared the threats of the Holy Land. 3 Tier 5 emperors, what did they amount to? One sword would solve everything. There was nothing to be afraid of. After finishing his offering of incense, Lord Long's gaze toward the crowd changed. It was a shift in perspective. He glanced at both sides. Then he turned his gaze to Shangguanyu, revealing a faint smile. Next, his gaze fell upon Emperor Yuing, who was startled by it. Lord Long. Emperor Yuing greeted him respectfully. Sensing an opportunity, Emperor Yuqing quickly spoke up. Please, Lord Long, make a decision for Brother Shangguan's surviving child. Enough, I know what you all want to say, Lord Long said indifferently. Your petty schemes are too outdated. This old man, have always followed the trends of the time, and you should do the same. Don't be constrained by the era. Yuqing, you act out of loyalty. Yuing, you adhere to the law of power supremacy. Neither of you are wrong. However, the ancient court has its own rules. If this young one wants to inherit his father's will, he needs to display sufficient strength. If inheritance were solely based on lineage, the ancient court would have crumbled long ago. Upon hearing this, Emperor Yuying's heart blossomed with joy. He knew Lord Long would say this. No matter how times changed, power remained supreme. If one wished to inherit their father's position, they must possess the strength to match. Emperor Yuqing looked disheartened. He also understood that for Shangguanyu to preserve Sword Pavilion, he needed to display enough strength. Although Shangguanyu's abilities were commendable, they still fell short. If he could pass the 7th floor, Shangguanyu would have a strong chance of taking over Sword Pavilion. Lord Long paused and sighed. But rules are dead, and people are alive. Shangguanyu, I now give you an opportunity. If, within 10,000 years, you can pass the 7th floor of the ancient tower, you may inherit Sword Pavilion. Yuing, during these 10,000 years, you are not to touch Sword Pavilion. Emperor Yuqing quickly pulled Shangguanyu and bowed respectfully. Thank you, Lord Long. 10,000 years, this was a long time even for emperors. After all, the time since the ancient domain world had been created was only a few 100,000 years. Emperor Yuing, on the other hand, felt uncomfortable. 10,000 years. It was too long. Not to mention breaking through the 7th level, even the millennial world was enough for Shangguanyu to prepare for merging with the Tao. Once he successfully merged with the Tao, he would have a legitimate reason to inherit, and by then no one could say anything. Long Gong was openly favoring Shangguanyu. With Long Gong's statement, the emperors who had taken sides dispersed. The memorial service concluded. Senior brother Zhao Qing did not leave. Although there were still many disciples of the Sword Pavilion maintaining this senior brother's authority, he knew the tide had turned against him. Fortunately, the identity of the son-in-law of Emperor Yuing had already been made public. With this title, he would not be deprived of the treasures he deserved. After sending off the guests, Shangguanyu, as usual, mocked Zhao Qing with a remark, and then simply left. After all, this was Jian Wushuang. Having spent a whole day resolving his identity issues, it was time to handle his own affairs. This ancient star was extraordinary. He needed to investigate it thoroughly. Moreover, an important event had spread through the city tonight. Jiang and I, a soon-to-be immortal emperor who had just joined the ancient court, was preparing to publicly challenge the ancient tower. This Jiang and I, personally recruited by Long Gong, was known as the most gifted and invincible Tao Lord, already a legendary figure across the ancient star. In an instant, countless people gathered to witness the spectacle. Jian Wushuang was no exception. He led his group and rode a luxurious chariot toward the city center. 3 ancient towers stood there. In the middle was a vast plaza, spanning over 10,000 miles in diameter. could accommodate over 1 billion cultivators. At this moment, tens of millions of cultivators had gathered. There were thousands of Dao Lords sitting in the front row watching. In reality, they couldn't see any scenes of battle. All they could see was which level the challenger had reached. Currently, someone was inside the ancient tower, and Zhang and I was waiting outside. By her side, the ancient court's contemporary immortal king Bai Yu, and Long Gong personally accompanied her. Challenging the ancient tower required strength verification. First, one had to be a true immortal. Then, they needed the strength of a 7-step true immortal or higher to be allowed inside. Otherwise, with so many true immortals around, there would be endless challengers every day, which would be too troublesome. They had to set some difficulty, otherwise, if these people just took up space without accomplishing anything, it would be a problem. There was also an entry fee. 1 billion immortal crystals for a ticket. That alone was enough to deter any true immortal below the Dao Lord level. The requirements for the first ancient tower were excessive, even stricter than those for Dao Lords. It couldn't be helped. There were just too many cultivators in the Great Perfection stage. If there were no restrictions, the queue would stretch across the entire ancient world. The third ancient tower, however, had no such restrictions. Because there were only a few dozen emperors, they could challenge it at will. But most emperors wouldn't attempt it unless they were confident, for the sake of saving face. Furthermore, the ancient tower's assessment of strength was incredibly precise. A Tier 1 emperor wouldn't make it through, not even past the first level. A Tier 2 emperor could barely survive the first level. Only a Tier 3 emperor could pass through the first level, and they had to be top tier to succeed. Thus, among the ancient court's emperors, only 10 had passed the first level. Only one person had passed the second level, Sankai Jinren. The ancient court's strongest combatant was Sankai Jinren, whose power rivaled that of a Tier 5 emperor. Based on this, passing the second level required Tier 5 strength, and to pass the third level, one would need the power of a Tier 6 emperor. To pass the fourth level, absolute pinnacle strength was necessary. So, what about the fifth level? The fifth level would require top-tier pinnacle strength. The sixth level would demand peak pinnacle strength. That was 5,000 times divine power. The seventh level required 8,000 divine power, and the eighth level 10,000 divine power. Calculating up to this point, Jian Wushuang took a deep breath. The existence of the ancient tower was certainly no simple matter. 100,000 divine power, this already counted as the tribulation realm. The key was still the 9th floor. To pass the 9th floor, wouldn't it require the strength of a universe master? This ancient tower was definitely left behind by a super-powerful universe master. After all, when he was in the ancient moon spacetime, he had already been invincible with the strength of a universe master. But what kind of place was the ancient moon spacetime? It was a time-space world, much stronger than the chaotic universe by countless times. Even universe masters at the tribulation realm were not uncommon. It seems that the one who left this ancient tower was an incredibly powerful universe master. And since this ancient tower is in the Gu domain star, then the Gu domain star must also have been left by that person. Jian Wushuang's interest was piqued. However, his probing abilities were limited. Otherwise, he could have completely seen through the entire Gu domain star. Now, it seemed he would have to explore slowly. After all, he came here for this reason, so he wasn't in a rush. As more and more experts gathered in the plaza, the ancient court even sent out celestial soldiers to maintain order. At that moment, in the second 9-story ancient tower, a green light stopped at the 6th floor. Who is the person inside? They've actually reached the 6th floor. For a moment, the voices in the plaza became a cacophony of noise. Passing the 6th floor meant being on the verge of harmony, a near-perfect Dao Lord. And it had to be a Dao Lord with a second-tier origin source. After all, in the entire ancient court, only a few hundred Dao Lords had managed to pass the 6th floor. There were only 4 who had reached the 7th floor. As for the 8th floor, none had ever passed in history. So, anyone who could pass the 6th floor was already at the pinnacle of Dao Lords. The 7th floor was the absolute limit. Since Zhang and I was attempting to challenge the ancient tower, the 4 great Dao Lords of the ancient court had all come. After all, They had never seen Zhang and I in action before and were somewhat unconvinced. They wanted to witness Zhang Ni's true strength. The four of them gathered together. I just saw her. How strong is she? I can't see through her. It's probably some treasure concealing her aura. I refuse to believe she can pass the 8th floor. In the entire history of the ancient court, no one has ever passed the 8th floor. In truth, they all understood if a heaven-defying Tao Lord from the sacred land came, there might be a chance to pass the 8th floor. However, those Tao Lords had a very slim chance of becoming emperors. They weren't worth cultivating since their origin Tao had already been overdrawn by the divine I-secret technique. Even if they became emperors, they would have many flaws. Though their combat power seemed formidable, moving further up the path was nearly impossible. This was also why the ancient court was willing to go to any lengths to wage war. The Gu domain world could not be destroyed by the sacred land. Or more accurately, it couldn't be destroyed by the Holy Lord. The ancient court's orthodoxy had to be preserved. Zhang Ni's joining had only solidified the stance of the ancient court's immortal kings and leaders. At this moment, all eyes were on Zhang and I. Dragon Duke and Immortal King Baiyu were filled with anticipation. Especially Immortal King Baiyu, he had never seen Zhang Ni's strength in action. He was very curious whether Zhang and I could pass the 9th floor. There was no need to think about the 8th floor. It was a certainty. Because the 8th floor corresponded to heaven-defying Tao Lords with combat power rivaling 2nd-tier peak, or even ordinary 3rd-tier emperors. What the 9th floor represented, they did not know. It certainly surpassed the 3rd-tier emperors, perhaps even the 4th-tier emperors. If what Dragon Duke said was true, Zhang and I had absolute confidence in passing the 9th floor. Swoosh! The Tao Lord who had just emerged from the ancient tower was shocked by the scene before him. When he entered, everything had been fine. But now, as he exited, he saw that countless people had gathered, including more than a dozen emperors. Among them were Dragon Duke and Immortal King Baiyu. Thousands of Tao Lords had assembled, and the 4 strongest Tao Lords of the ancient court were present, surrounded by 1 million true immortals and over 10 million nascent soul stage cultivators. I only passed the 6th floor. There's no need for such a grand welcome. He was completely dumbfounded. Seeing him standing there in a daze, the emperor overseeing the ancient tower couldn't help but urge, "Hurry and leave this place. Don't block the entrance." Ha! Before he could react, he was shooed away. It wasn't until he met some friends congratulating him that he finally understood. The quasi-immortal Emperor Zhang and I had arrived. She was here to challenge the ancient tower. Humph! I thought it was some emperor coming to challenge the tower. Turns out it's just a Tao Lord. No matter how strong a quasi-immortal emperor is, she's still just a Tao Lord. Though he felt somewhat disgruntled, he knew very well that someone capable of being called a quasi-immortal emperor and fighting Emperor Yu Ying to a standstill was someone far beyond his level. As a Tao Lord who had only passed the 6th floor, he was no match for her. Jian Wushuang could only quietly step forward, though there was still a sense of anticipation. After all, the 7th level of the ancient tower had always been the limit for the cultivators of the ancient court. He wanted to see if anyone could break that limit. With the anticipation of the entire crowd, Zhang and I nodded at Lord Long and Immortal King Baiyu beside her, and then walked forward. Faced with the ancient tower, she appeared calm. With one step, she entered the entrance. In the next moment, her figure disappeared. In her place, a flash of blue light appeared on the 1st level of the ancient tower. Whoosh! In an instant, before even a breath could pass, the blue light had ascended to the 2nd level. Lord Long remained composed, but Immortal King Baiyu exclaimed in surprise, "So fast!" Whoosh! Before he even finished speaking, Zhang and I had already reached the 5th level. She had used only one breath for the first 5 levels, including the time for teleportation. The actual time she spent in action was likely the same for each level. Each fight resolved in a blink of an eye, followed by her advancing to the next level. After passing the 5th level, the 6th level was a major turning point. To pass it meant one was an extreme powerhouse among Tao Lords, capable of merging with the Tao itself. The Tao Lord who had passed this level before had stepped into the pinnacle ranks of Tao Lords from that moment. There were only about 100 such Tao lords in the entire ancient court, and perhaps over 1,000 in the entire ancient domain world. The Tao lords from the sacred lands were significantly more powerful, 10 times stronger than those of the ancient court. This speed is twice as fast as when I did it, Immortal King Baiyu exclaimed in shock. If she wasn't faster than you, now that would be surprising. Master, that's not fair, Baiyu protested. Lord Long smiled faintly and said nothing more. In just the time of this brief exchange, Jiang and I had already passed the 6th level. Before their conversation had even ended, she had reached the 7th level. Her speed left everyone in shock. In just 2 breaths, Jiang and I had traversed the first 7 levels of the ancient tower. If someone had started chatting with a friend just as she entered the tower, by the time their conversation began, Jiang and I would already have surpassed a level they could only dream of reaching. At that moment, the 4 Tao lords of the ancient court, whether they were the disciples of the immortal kings or young talents from the great wastelands, were all wide-eyed in disbelief. Zhao Qing, in particular, took a deep breath and trembled in astonishment. How did she do it? The beasts on the 7th level, at the level of the true immortal of the 9 steps, have incredible defense. Back then, I fought for 7 days and barely made it through. I only managed because I relied on my sheer willpower. But she did it in just 2 breaths and passed through the first 7 levels. When Zhao Qing had first passed, he hadn't dared to try again. Even then, he wasn't confident that he could successfully pass the 7th level a second time. After cultivating for several thousand more years, Jian and I finally passed the 7th level for the second time. Though it was no easy feat, what took her several days to accomplish on the 7th level was something she could now overcome with a single strike. As the masses stood in shock, Jian and I had already advanced through the 8th level and reached the 9th. This time, the light that appeared was not blue but golden. Without giving the onlookers time to recover from their astonishment, the entire ancient tower began to tremble, and the golden light burst forth. Beams of light shot out in all directions. Inside the tower, a sword aura erupted toward the sky. Jian and I stood at the top of the ancient tower. Dressed in flowing white robes, her divine sword held in reverse, the sword intent between her brows surged upward. She had passed all the levels. In just 3 breaths, Jian and I had fully cleared the ancient tower. There had never been anyone before her, and there would be no one after. She had done it, and with such ease. To her, it was simple. There was nothing she found worthy of celebration. If she wanted to, a single strike from her could shatter the world of the ancient domain. Dragon Lord and King Baiyue, along with the newly arrived Yuan Zhang Tianzuan and the 3 talents True One, stood dumbfounded. 3 breaths to pass the 9th level? Even we couldn't manage that. The 8th level was filled with 10,000 beasts at the Tao Lord level. I don't know what awaits on the 9th, but judging by the progression of strength, it must at least be 10,000 beasts at the Emperor level. 10,000 Emperors. Even if we joined forces, it would take us a full day to kill them all. And even the weakest Emperor can't be wiped out in large numbers with a single blow. Yuan Zhang Tianzuan's lips trembled as he said, "The rise of humanity begins now." In this generation, the 4 ancient court powerhouses were all filled with excitement. Now the ancient domain will rise. Our ancient domain world will surely dominate this chaotic universe. And Jian and I will become an unparalleled existence, reigning supreme. Though they had never met a universe master, they were certain that Jian Ni's accomplishments would not fall short of such a title. The immortal kings were astounded. The Tao lords and true immortals, however, were completely dumbfounded. For them, the ancient tower was a measure of combat strength. Now, Jian and I had broken that measuring stick, causing them to doubt themselves. Why was Jian and I so powerful? They were all Tao lords. It was understandable if she was 10 or 100 times stronger. They didn't fully grasp it, but they could attribute it to the gap in their mastery of the origin source or differences in secret techniques. But if she was 10,000 times or even millions of times stronger, it defied comprehension. They had reached a point of self-doubt. On the stone seats in the square, only Jian Wushuang and his companions remained composed. Both of her ultimate daos are already perfected. She can now fully unleash the sword of life. If her mastery of the Tao of Death reaches perfection as well, then I'll be able to teach her the art of the dual sword radiance /. He was deeply gratified. Jian Ni's strength reminded him of his own past. Back then, he had also defied the heavens. A Tao Lord battling at the peak of his powers. A peak power battling a universe master. For a moment, he recalled his humiliating struggle against Gula on the Dragon God continent. At that time, he had been at his peak, yet he had fought against Gula. It was worth noting that Gula possessed the power of a 7 tribulation master. Though not a universe master, Gula commanded over 1 million units of divine power. Jian Wushuang had been ruthlessly beaten, only managing to kill Gula after becoming a universe master himself. He had also once fought above his level, admired by millions as a heaven's chosen. He had been the pride of Qishan Temple. And now so was Jian and I. Standing at the top of the ancient tower, Jian and I suddenly felt a special consciousness closing in on her. It was a presence from within the ancient tower. The aura of Gula's revival was slowly rising. Apart from Jian and I, only Jian Wushuang sensed it. He narrowed his eyes, and with a single thought, detected the awakening aura. As expected, the appearance of this ancient domain star is no coincidence. After capturing that strange aura, Jian Wushuang formulated a plan to challenge the ancient tower. Though he could detect the aura, he couldn't get closer or probe any further. The only way forward was to challenge the ancient tower. Jian and I had passed the 9th level, likely triggering some kind of restriction. This aligned with the nature of the ancient tower. Its purpose was to screen out the strongest, then absorb them as elite subordinates. The ancient tower had been crafted by at least a semi-divine being. A semi-divine being looking to recruit subordinates would certainly seek out talents like Jian and I. The combat strength required to pass the 9th level was likely at the limit of an ultimate Tao Lord. The threshold wasn't too high. Back in the days of Qishan Temple, they could have gathered thousands of ultimate Tao Lords. Not to mention a semi-divine expert. Those who weren't ultimate Tao Lords or ultimate emperors likely wouldn't even bother accepting one as a disciple. An ancient consciousness connected with Jian Ni's mind. Though it was only a brief connection, countless pieces of information were transmitted. Jian and I was slightly startled, but quickly regained her composure. She flew down from the ancient tower and approached Lord Long. I want to challenge the 3rd ancient tower. Her voice wasn't loud, yet it resonated across the entire square. Everyone froze in surprise. What? She wants to challenge the 3rd ancient tower? The 3rd ancient tower was designed for emperors. Even Tao Lords couldn't enter it. One needed to verify their origin source to gain access. Lord Long was about to explain, but Supreme Lord Yuanzhang raised his hand and said, "All right, I'll have someone open it immediately." "Thanks." Jian and I nodded calmly. Below the 3rd ancient tower, the grand formation suddenly lit up. The surrounding restrictions silently disappeared. Jian and I glanced at the crowd before turning and walking toward the 3rd ancient tower. At this moment, Supreme Lord Yuanzhang explained to the others, "The 3rd ancient tower indeed has requirements for the origin source, but I discovered that these requirements aren't because of the emperor title. They are related to the special nature of the origin source. Have you ever heard of the ultimate path? The ultimate path?" Lord Long was taken aback and replied, "I've come across it in some ancient records. It's the most defiant origin source. A Tao Lord who controls the ultimate path can slay an emperor, and an ultimate emperor can even challenge a universe master beyond their tier." These were records from ancient inheritances. Throughout the history of the ancient domain world, no one had ever mastered the ultimate path. Therefore, the exact power level remained unclear, but it was certainly heaven-defying. "Are you saying Jian and I has mastered the ultimate path? Is that even a question?" Supreme Lord Yuanzhang said joyfully, "Only an ultimate Tao Lord could possess such strength. Moreover, her origin source is the Tao of the sword, focused on slaughter. That's why she was able to sweep through the competition so quickly. Such a powerful origin source surpasses even us emperors, so naturally, she can enter the 3rd ancient tower. Just watch." She'll at least make it past the third level. At this moment, one of the strongest cultivators in the ancient court, the 3 talents true person, exclaimed, "The third level houses 10,000 beasts with the power of Tier 4 emperors. If she passes through, it means she has the strength of a Tier 5 warrior." Back when she unleashed that sword in the overturning sea's ancient domain, Jianni's power was already on par with the Holy Lord. "I believe she'll pass the third level, and maybe even the fourth. Let's wait and see then." They all took a deep breath, anticipation rising in their hearts. Before the third ancient tower, Jianni infused her origin source. A blue light flashed, and her body disappeared from where she stood, officially entering the ancient tower. First layer, 1 breath. Second layer, also 1 breath. At this moment, the crowd outside had fallen silent. Each of them had their mouths wide open, staring at the third ancient tower. They had become numb. When she passed through the second layer, the 3 immortal kings and Lord Long remained quiet. This was what they had anticipated. The only unexpected part was that Jianni progressed just as quickly as she did through the second tower. It felt like there was barely any difference in speed. Whoosh! She cleared the third layer as well. Although there was a slight pause, it took her 2 breaths. Fourth layer, 3 breaths. Fifth layer, 7th layer. In the space of the 7th layer, there were 10,000 ferocious beasts with Tier 6 combat power. Jianni's swordsmanship was fierce. One after another, the beasts fell. It ultimately took her a quarter of an hour to reach the 8th layer. In the 8th layer, Jianni spent the longest time, consuming an entire day. The 8th layer. Jianni has cleared the 8th layer. The numb crowd continued to wait. They were waiting for Jianni to completely clear the tower. 9th layer. 10,000 beasts with supreme combat power. At this point, Jianni unleashed her full strength. The brilliance of the Sword of Life illuminated the entire ancient tower, and in the end, the burst of green light covered the entire ancient star domain. For the 9th layer, Jianni took 3 days to clear it completely. At the top of the third ancient tower, Jianni bathed in holy light. At this moment, the ancient star domain itself was shaking. The most mysterious dungeon of the ancient star domain had been fully opened. A surge of overwhelming power erupted from the dungeon. This ferocious force poured forth, and in the eyes of the spectators, the plaza split open, revealing a massive fissure that connected to the dungeon. This was linked to the strongest force within the ancient star domain. However, even the 3 immortal kings of the ancient court had never been able to open this force. Today it had been opened because of Jianni. From within the violent golden light, a black statue began to rise slowly. It was a black-scaled beast, and wisps of dark energy circled above the statue. At the moment the statue appeared, the entire ancient star domain trembled. Countless people gazed up at the statue, feeling a deep urge to kneel. Even though it was merely a lifeless object, a simple statue, it was enough to suppress all the strongest experts. The key was that, when staring at the statue, one could comprehend origin source from the scales of the statue. It contained the complete origin source of the universe, and encompassed many universes. This was by no means something the origin source of a universe master could compare to. Among the crowd, Jian Wushuang and the others were equally astonished. This statue's aura is terrifying, 100 times stronger than the Lord of Divine Flame. Each scale contains the essence of a complete universe's origin source. This is definitely a supreme treasure of enlightenment. Immortal Zhou couldn't help but exclaim. Xianxia trembled and said, "This statue gives me such a strange feeling. It's too oppressive." Suddenly, Xianxia gasped, "I remember now. This is the oppressive feeling of a universe god." He exclaimed, "The owner of this statue was a universe god." A universe god? Everyone around them thought Xianxia was speaking nonsense. Aside from Immortal Zhou, no one else knew about the existence of a universe god. Even Immortal Zhou had only heard of a universe god. After all, aside from meeting Brother Ghost Eye, even the Lord of Divine Flame had never seen a universe god in person. It was only through exploring certain secret realms that he had learned of the existence of universe gods. This memory was extremely valuable to the Lord of Divine Flame, and he would never share it with immortal Zhou. Therefore, even Zhou knew very little. But when he heard Xianxia say that the statue belonged to a universe god, his mind was shaken. I never expected that the ancient star domain contained the legacy of a universe god. If this spreads, the entire chaotic universe, and even nearby chaotic universes, will stop at nothing to seize such a treasure. The legacy of a universe god. It's countless times stronger than that of a universe master. Previously, the most powerful legacy in the ancient star domain had been the Holy Land. That was the legacy of a universe master. It contained the inheritance of the first 5 turns. But that Holy Land was merely left behind by a universe master below the 6th tribulation realm. Here is the translated passage in past tense. With the requested standardizations, it couldn't even be considered a top-tier inheritance. In the chaotic universe, the most powerful inheritances were left behind by universe masters of the 9th tribulation realm. Those even stronger had generally crossed the sea and ascended to the heavens. For example, Zhao Qing had received the inheritance of the Lord of Divine Fire, thanks to the prophet, senior brother Ghost Eye, and teacher Xianxia's plans. Otherwise, they wouldn't have placed the realm beast's body in the hall of the Lord of Divine Fire's inheritance. The inheritance of the Lord of Divine Fire was already considered the highest level of inheritance within the chaotic universe. But now, a sculpture of a universe god had appeared on ancient domain star, so there might be more inheritances hidden in the underground vault. Even if there wasn't, just the presence of this universe god's sculpture alone would be enough to incite universe masters to slaughter one another. After all, in this chaotic universe, there had never been a universe god's inheritance before. This was the path to ultimate power, and the owner of this sculpture was no ordinary universe god. Jian Wushuang gazed at the sculpture, his heart calm. There was a time when he was much stronger than the being this sculpture represented, so naturally, there wasn't much respect in his eyes. He was simply curious as to how this sculpture had come to be on Ancient Domain Star. From his investigation, Ancient Domain Star was just average. It could be considered a higher-level inheritance among universe masters, but it had nothing to do with universe gods. Strange, a sculpture of a universe god has appeared. Could it be that there's really a universe god's inheritance or treasure in the underground vault? Jian Wushuang stroked his chin. He needed to go down and investigate. However, this was Jiang Ni's moment of glory, so he didn't rush to move, but instead looked over at Jiang and I. The sculpture had appeared due to Jiang Ni's defiance of fate. Now, it depended on what was happening on Jiang Ni's side. At the top of the ancient building, Jiang and I, faced with the sculpture, was also filled with excitement. This was the strongest existence she had ever encountered. Just a single sculpture rendered her immobile. The overwhelming aura pressed down on her spirit. Unfortunately, she didn't know that Jian Wushuang, at his peak, had been countless times stronger than this sculpture. She looked up at the ancient building with immense reverence in her heart. It was the respect of the weak toward the strong. The aura of the sculpture seemed to also be watching Jiang and I. At the center of the forehead of the scaled beast, a massive vortex began to form. From the vortex, black mist condensed into a humanoid figure. "Buzz, mortal, kneel before me." With just these few words from the black mist figure, every strong individual in the ancient domain star world dropped to their knees. Whether emperor or a 3-year-old child, none could resist. They all knelt. Billions of cultivators on the plaza of ancient domain star also knelt in unison. The 3 great immortal kings of the ancient court and Lord Long tried to resist, but within moments, they, too, had no choice but to kneel. They barely managed to lift their heads and gaze at the sky. The black mist figure appeared very satisfied. At that moment, however, there were still those who hadn't knelt. Jiang and I, atop the ancient building, remained standing. Jian Wushuang, Shuiyang, and the others also did not kneel. Zhou Chun was the first who couldn't resist and knelt down. Shuiyang struggled, gritting his teeth, and roared, "I won't kneel. You are a fallen universe god. not worthy of my kneeling. I, at least, am a proud scion of a universe god family. My ancestors were all universe gods. I am also a demigod. How could I kneel to a dead being like you, an alien beast? You're not worthy of my respect. Xianxia gritted his teeth, forcing himself to endure with sheer willpower. But in the end, he still fell short. Thud! He collapsed onto the ground, completely prostrate. Sigh! Jian Wushuang sighed. Does it matter who you kneel to? Back then, you even knelt before mortals. One more dead person won't make a difference. A mortal is just a mortal. Now, I've returned to the path of cultivation. Xianxia, still kneeling, stubbornly retorted. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang could only shake his head helplessly. With a wave of his hand, he commanded in a stern voice, "No kneeling allowed." The moment his voice rang out, the overwhelming pressure on Xianxia and Immortal Zhou Chun instantly dissipated, allowing them to stand up. Immortal Zhou Chun, astonished, exclaimed, "What happened? That oppressive force. It's gone." Jian Wushuang, how did you do that? He was shocked. Although Jian Wushuang had always had hidden cards, carried an air of mystery, and wielded great strength with near-supreme combat power, even universe masters couldn't defy the will of the universe god. Yet Jian Wushuang not only bore the pressure with ease but also calmly lifted the burden from them. The will of a dead man can't suppress the living. It's as simple as that, Jian Wushuang said, his hands clasped behind his back. Xianxia, still frustrated, muttered, "Easy for you to say. If I were a universe god, I'd say the same thing. Unfortunately, you're not," Jian Wushuang replied, a faint smile appearing on his lips. Immortal Zhou Chen's eyes were wide with disbelief. Could it be that you really are a universe god? Earlier, Xianxia had hinted at it. But at that time, Immortal Zhou Chen didn't believe that Jian Wushuang was a universe god. Nor did he think Xianxia possessed even the combat power of a demigod. He had assumed they were both exaggerating. But now he was starting to believe it. He could accept that Jian Wushuang might have once been a universe god. However, Xianxia definitely wasn't a demigod. No demigod would behave as shamelessly as Xianxia did. "All right, let's just watch from the sidelines," Jian Wushuang said calmly. "I want to see what this guy is trying to achieve by making everyone kneel." At that moment, the shadowy figure in the black mist turned to Jian Wushuang and roared angrily. "How dare a mere mortal not kneel before a god like me? Daring to look me in the eye? You deserve death." With those words, the shadowy figure's eyes shot out a beam of light, aimed directly at Jian Wushuang. Bang! Before the light even reached Jian Wushuang, it exploded instantly. A willpower attack? Ridiculous! Jian Wushuang sneered. "You, a mere 3-star universe god, dare to use willpower against me? You're courting death." The other party's willpower was at about the level of a 3-star, which meant his divine power might only be at the peak of a 2-star. If his overall combat strength reached 3-star, it would already be impressive. This kind of universe god, back when Jian Wushuang was on the realm god continent, he could kill a whole bunch of them with just a glance. And now, this being was asking him to kneel? It might have been understandable if the opponent had peak strength, but they were all dead men walking anyway. What was the point of pretending? Since Jian Wushuang had transformed from a universe god into a mortal, he had adapted to local customs. He never put on airs, knowing that it wouldn't change anything. He understood that he could only regain his power by training again and reaching the peak once more. Pretending here, making such a big scene without doing anything substantial, it was pointless. Out there, he would have fallen 100 times by now. The shadowy figure sensed something unusual about Jian Wushuang's willpower, especially since Jian Wushuang had accurately identified him as a 3-star universe god. Panic flashed across his face. You're also a universe god? Impossible. There are no more universe gods in the sea of universes. You can't be one. Jian Wushuang sneered. Whether I'm a universe god or not doesn't matter. What matters is that you aren't one. No, what truly matters is that you don't have the strength of a universe god. Arrogant. Even if I lack peak power, I'm not someone a clown like you can provoke. The shadowy figure shouted furiously. I am the Zhou celestial god. When I ruled over 10,000 universes, dominating the heavens, you weren't even born. He didn't recognize Jian Wushuang, assuming he was just a newcomer. But Jian Wushuang had no trace of origin source in his power. Relief washed over the shadowy figure. When Jian Wushuang heard the name, his brow twitched, and he said, Zhou, never heard of it. Guess you were pretty weak back then. He was deliberately goading him, trying to get him to reveal more about the mysteries beyond the heavens. But Zhou barked, I am one of the 9 celestial gods under the true martial emperor. You dare claim you've never heard of me? How dare you boast before me? If it weren't for this girl's presence, I wouldn't even bother dealing with you. With that, he turned his gaze to Zhang and I. She was the real reason he had emerged, a powerful figure who had fused the 3 ultimate paths into one. No, she hadn't fully merged them yet, but it wouldn't be long. Little girl, congratulations. You are about to become my 10th worry. Zhou pointed a finger, and a streak of black light shot out, heading straight for Zhang and I. The 3 immortal kings kneeling on the ground were shocked. They had thought Zhang and I had triggered some kind of legacy, and with such a presence it would be her opportunity. They never expected it to be a killing blow. The willpower contained within the black light assaulted everyone's consciousness. Though Zhang and I had incredible talent, she couldn't withstand the willpower of a universe god. Her aura shifted, and a trace of blackness appeared in her eyes. Jian Wushuang was alarmed. His willpower instantly left his body, bursting out with a thunderous roar. Clouds gathered in the sky, and Jian Wushuang's willpower avatar descended. You're asking for death. He hadn't intended to manifest, but seeing Zhou use Zhang Ni's 3 ultimate paths to resurrect some body sealed in a carving was unacceptable. It didn't matter who he was trying to release, but attacking Zhang and I was something Jian Wushuang couldn't tolerate. A mere 3-star universe god. And you dare call yourself a true god in front of me? Jian Wushuang's willpower descended into the mental realm. His enormous avatar appeared instantly. On the ancient star, Zhou willpower avatar was as large as the ancient star itself. But when Jian Wushuang descended, the number of universes floating around his avatar was uncountable. When his massive gaze swept over the beings below, it triggered a mental storm with a single blink. What? Zhou was utterly terrified. You're also a universe god. He couldn't believe it, especially since Jian Wushuang's avatar resembled an ancient demon. This was Jian Wushuang's true form, the most noble life form, realm beast, a king born of chaos. With a single word, he could create a universe of his own. The massive realm beast avatar grabbed the previously arrogant Zhou celestial god. The other party's willpower was no threat to Jian Wushuang at all. With a single punch, he shattered Zhou avatar. No! Zhou celestial god cried out in desperation. I haven't reached the 10th worry yet. I cannot fall. Hearing his desperate cries, Jian Wushuang remained unmoved. Perish! With that single thought, all of Zhou celestial god's remaining willpower in the underground cavern was completely annihilated. So it's just a bug. No wonder it dares to be so arrogant. Universe god. It's just a joke. Jian Wushuang sneered and his incarnation withdrew. At this moment, the experts in the square finally woke up from their shock. He returned to his original body. The 3 immortal kings of Gu Court were also dumbfounded. They only felt that they had just felt an irresistible force that was directly suppressed. He couldn't move. Immediately after, a powerful spirit energy appeared and shattered everything. Only then would they recover. Zhang and I, were you the one who killed the universe god's incarnation earlier? It wasn't me. Zhang and I shook her head. I'm not too sure either. I was still able to maintain my consciousness, but then another consciousness descended. My sea of consciousness instantly became empty, and I could no longer sense the situation around me. Universe God? As the strongest of the 3 immortal kings, Taoist 3 Talent frowned and said, In that case, there's another universe god? The three celestial kings were all shocked. If that was the case, then the Arceus region would be in deep trouble. The two universe gods will avatars. What was hidden in the cellar? How many legacies were there? They hadn't been able to figure it out after so many years. This was also why the emperors of the ancient court often went into seclusion to explore the cellars. However, the treasures he obtained were very few. This was because the cellar looked like the ruins of a sect. Moreover, it was a relic that could not be opened. If he couldn't enter, there would be no treasures. At most, they could only walk around the area, but there were also some supportive treasures that could be used inside. In short, they were guarding a treasure that was either a mountain of gold or a mountain of silver, but they were helpless. Now, Zhang and I had suddenly triggered the appearance of two universe god will avatars. Then the secret of the cellar could no longer be hidden. The surrounding Arceus region world could sense such a huge commotion. Right now, the best way to deal with them was to kill those who heard about universe gods. He wanted to hide the secret as much as possible. Otherwise, he would attract a bunch of powerful existences to the Arceus region. Below high heavens, even though there were no universe gods, there were still quite a few universe masters. If a group of universe masters came, they would be able to escape even if they started running now, unless they entered high heavens. However, even universe masters weren't confident that they could cross universe ocean, so how could they? Other than continuing to hide it, there was another way. That was Zhang and I. Zhang Ni's potential was simply too great, and she already possessed a combat strength that was above the peak. If he succeeded in his Dao integration, he would be comparable to a universe master. With enough time, Zhang and I could become a super existence among universe masters. But did they still have time? The three of them fell silent. However, Zhang and I was not thinking about this. Instead, she was a little distracted, even though she was unable to sense the aura of that universe god who appeared later on. However, the incarnation that could instantly kill true god Jiuyu disappeared again. Was that person helping her? Everyone, it's time for us to make a decision. The crisis in the Arceus region isn't as simple as it seems. I don't think we can hide the fact that the cellar has been opened. We can only rely on our strength to protect planet Arceus or our own lives. I'm responsible for this too. If you need help, just let me know. Zhang and I took a deep breath. The first target is everyone here. The Baiyu Immortal King was the current generation Immortal King and was also the one who pushed for the Battle of the Orthodoxies. His eyes were filled with killing intent. We can't keep these people alive. Heavenly Venerate Yuanzheng and Taoist Sankai looked at each other but did not speak. I'll do this. Duke Long stood up. The most important thing now is to seal off the outer void and get rid of the surrounding 6 Arceus regions. I'll suppress all the cultivators within 5,000 kilometers. Baiyu, take this opportunity to declare a decisive battle against the sacred land. Let the cultivators of the 6 Arceus regions participate in the battle and give them some dignity. Ruthless. Duke Long directly expressed Baiyu Immortal King's intentions. That was to silence them. Of course, Duke Long was smarter. He did not kill him directly. He used the formation to take away all the cultivators within 5,000 kilometers of the square and put them into the cellar. Anyway, the cellar was very spacious and isolated from the outside world. It was simply a chosen place, following which the surrounding 6 Arceus regions were all sealed off. Experts began to be selected to form battle formations, and at the same time, the final battle was announced. The Holy Lands were very surprised. They hadn't expected that they wouldn't delay. Why did they have to fight so early? Both sides began to prepare for the battle. This dispelled most of the people's thoughts about the strange changes happening on planet Guyu. He began to prepare for the battle wholeheartedly. After making all these preparations, planet Guyu instantly calmed down. The entrance to the cellar was sealed and no one could open it. The 3 ancient buildings were also moved into the cellar. The ground had returned to normal, but because the ancient building was gone, it became much calmer. It was mainly because the decisive battle was so sudden that many people were not prepared. At this moment, they were all desperately trying to increase their strength so that they could survive the final battle. There was a third force watching the battle between the Gu court and the sacred land. There were void cultivators. They were everywhere, in a hidden black hole. It was a huge mutated beast with 8 tentacles and a red eye. It wasn't a sector beast, but a void devil with the bloodline of a sector beast. It was the blood that the sector beasts had spilled when they broke the universe god continent, which had contaminated the cultivators and caused them to become like this. Supervisor, the decisive battle between the Holy Land and the Gu court is set for 3 months. The disparity in strength between the two sides is too great. Tiki. The tentacle kept dancing, and a vicious voice came out of its huge eyes. That's not important. We need to take down Planet Guyu. The supervisor's tone was very crazy. As the void monitor of the Arceus region world, he saw the arrival of universe gods. He saw the great opportunity hidden in the cellar. He also saw how powerful Zhang and I was. He was the strongest expert in the Arceus region. At the same time, he was also the king with the highest bloodline among the void cultivators. This was because his bloodline came from the first generation of void cultivators. His body was similar to that of a sector beast. Pass down the command to deploy the void army and station it outside of planet Ancient region. Once the two sides have a decisive battle, we will attack planet Ancient region. The supervisor's voice rang out in the air. Countless void cultivators and void creatures began to gather. They were even more powerful. Don't forget, Sacred Master died in the hands of Sukong. That void watcher had the combat strength of a top-tier rank 6. However, compared to Zhang and I, he was far too lacking. Zhang and I could kill him with a single strike. However, for the sake of the opportunity to become a universe god, he was willing to give it a shot. Even if he died, it would be worth it. After all, it was related to the opportunities of universe gods. Once he succeeded, he wouldn't have to live like the other void cultivators. He would be able to control a large world.